Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. I hate being late to anything the whole time I'm late. It bothers me. I had to go into the city, film a story today, then go meet with a friend. Shout out to that friend if you are watching right now. And one thing led to another, and I was late getting home, but now I'm here. Haven't even changed out of my suit and tie. I'm wearing my suit and tie. So there we go. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We are still having a stream tonight. And from the bottom of my heart, I thank you for your patience. Let's go.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Thank you again for waiting. I do appreciate it. But I always do these streams. I don't always start when I intend to. This was a pretty long delay. I was in the chat giving you updates, though. It wasn't ambiguous, but here I am. And you get to see me in my suit, right? Because I was rushing home from the city, came home from the city and jumped on to here to talk to all of you. And I'm so glad to be here with all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're having yet another one of our late night conversations. This one we're starting a little earlier. I've been doing 10 and 11, but this one was supposed to be at 9, but didn't get home on time, so it was a little bit delayed. I'm trying to figure out what's the best for my audience. I want to make sure that nothing interrupts me. I've been doing a lot of work lately, a lot of lives, a lot of packages, a lot of Sputnik radio interviews, doing a lot of different things. And I don't like to cut in and interview these things. And I have various people I have to check in with and such. So trying to figure out the ideal time to do one of these streams. But here we are, and I am talking to all of you. So welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you. The way we do these streams is I give my opening remarks, or just whatever I feel like talking about tonight, whatever's on my mind. And while I give my opening remarks, I am writing down your super chat questions. So if there's something you want to ask me about in the second half of our program, all you got to do is send me a super chat, and I will write down your question, your concern, and then I will answer it in the second half of our show. I'll do my best within reason. Every so often I get a nasty, rude super chat, but for the most part, if it's a decent super chat, I will answer it in the second half of our show. And that's how these things work. So that's the way it works. First, I give my opening remarks. Then we do the roll call. Where I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And then after that, I answer super chat questions for the rest of the night. So yeah, I'm just going to jump into my opening remarks for tonight. My opening remarks for tonight might be a little bit all over the place, but there you go. And when I say my opening remarks are a little bit all over the place, I remember when I was a kid. I watched a lot of PBS. Maybe people in other countries don't know what that is. PBS is Public Broadcasting System. It is the government-funded, not-for-profit airwaves, TV channels in the United States. They have a lot of children's programming, Sesame Street and Barney and shows like that. When I was a child, I watched a lot of PBS. My parents were very concerned about what I might see on the television. They did not want me to see sex and violence and rock and roll and stuff like that. So as a child, I watched a lot of PBS, and every few months, PBS would stop the normal programming. You'd be watching Barney or was it Wishbone the dog or Arthur or Teletubbies or whatever the kids shows were they had on PBS, or you'd be watching This Old House and watching a guy repair his screen door, or you'd be watching Mr. Rogers walk in and say, "Can you say I'm spatial?" You'd be watching, I don't know, there was a show with a guy who would paint. I mean, it was the most boring thing in the world. I don't know how anyone watched it, but there was a show where there was a guy, he'd walk in and say, "Hello, I'm a painter." And you'd watch him like paint a picture. I don't know. They had the Antiques Roadshow, PBS. Remember PBS? PBS. And I remember every couple months, PBS would stop their normal programming. They would show like the first half of the TV show, and then they would start fundraising. And then they would say, "And if you really like what you're doing, send us money right now." And they would just do this like fundraising telethon to get people to donate money to them. And it would be fundraising. I remember, sometimes as I would flip through, you'd be watching these like fundraising things they would do on PBS. It was the local Cleveland station on PBS. Sometimes the fundraising they would do on PBS, the local like PBS fundraising, got to be so silly. I remember one time they were doing one of these PBS fundraisers. I remember this from my childhood very distinctly. I was flipping through the channels. It was PBS. They were doing a fundraiser. They said, "Well, if you like what we do here on PBS, become a member, donate money to us. And now we have local Elvis impersonator. Local Elvis impersonator will talk." And then this guy came out in an Elvis costume. And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I'm here on PBS. Yeah, and I'm all shook up. Oh, boy, I'm all shook up at the party here at PBS. They almost spilled pop on my blue suede shoes. Oh." I mean, it was like that, right? They'd have local celebrities, the local dog catcher, the local ventriloquist with his dummy would come on there. And it was just this, like, they were trying to fill airtime as they would raise money for public broadcasting. It was really something amusing to watch. And I don't feel like they do that anymore, right? They have local TV stations, right? Kind of reminds me of that movie that Weird Al Yankovic made, UHF. Where it was about like local TV stations and how they would do like quirky things. You don't have that as much anymore, but I remember that, the PBS, the local Cleveland PBS would be doing one of their fundraisers, and, they'd have like a local polka band come on and play, they'd have the accordions and the clarinets, and, they'd have the local polka band play some traditional polka music from Eastern Europe. And oh boy, those were the days. Right? And I remember sitting there, and I was a kid, right? And you're a kid, and it's the TV. What are you gonna do? So the TV just stays on, right? And they got the local Elvis impersonator, and they've got the local polka band and the local dog catcher giving an interview about why you should get your pet spayed or neutered. Just anything to fill up time in between their, asking you to donate money to PBS. It was really something special. I remember that. Now, National Public Radio is something completely different, by the way. That's NPR. That's the radio. Completely different than the TV. Are they always asking you for money? Yes, they are. Are they sponsored by the American government? Yes, they are. Do they get big grants from the Ford Foundation and Exxon Mobil and BP and Shell and Chevron? Yes, they do. Do they spread U.S. government propaganda but not call it that and claim to be independent? Yes, but it's on the radio. NPR is on the radio. PBS is on the TV. And I don't know. Sometimes I remember, like, every so often there would be like, there'd be like a holiday, right? It'd be one of those Mondays you get off, Martin Luther King Day or President's Day, or I don't know, one of those Mondays that you get off work. And I would be a kid and I would turn on PBS at like 2:30 in the afternoon, and you would see some of the weirdest shit. I remember they would have shows about like the rhythm of words, and they'd have like academics analyzing the rhythm with which people speak. They'd have documentaries on PBS about streets. This street in New York City, we're going to go over the history of it for 3 decades. Once there was a sausage factory on the street, and then they replaced it with a hamburger stand. And then they'll interview, yes, I remember when I lived on that street 30 years ago. Why, that was the best street in America. It's like this quaint documentary about a street, right? PBS that was something special. I don't watch TV very much anymore. My wife and I have cable, but my wife does most of the watching. Occasionally I'll watch something on it with her. So I don't know what they run on PBS these days. I actually don't remember. I don't follow it, but I do remember turning on PBS and watching them, do their fundraising. That was certainly an interesting experience, right? And it was Cleveland, right? So it had a local Cleveland flavor to it, right? Like the polka music, right? That's a big thing. In Cleveland, you have a lot of Eastern European folks. Now, I wasn't in Cleveland. I was about 2.5 hours south of Cleveland. That's where I grew up, a little town called Orville. But I remember that, Cleveland was where all the TV stations that we would watch would be. And Cleveland, there's a very big Eastern European population there. A lot of Serbs, a lot of Croats, a lot of Ukrainians, a lot of Hungarians, and so, when they would do local stuff, it would often have, flavors of the Eastern European stuff. They'd have a polka band on there. They'd have the chair of the Lithuanian club or something come on there and talk about why he loves PBS. That reminds me of when, I don't know if you remember, during the first presidential debate of the 2012 elections, they had Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney debated Barack Obama. And one of the big lines from the debate was Mitt Romney, he talks like this. He's very performative. He's almost like a Ken Barbie doll. He speaks like this. And Mitt Romney, with his hair slicked back, was talking to Barack Obama. And he said, look, I like PBS. I like Big Bird. But do we need to borrow from China to pay for it? I remember that. That was the big line from the debate. I like PBS, like Big Bird. But do we need to borrow from China to pay for it, Mr. Obama? It was really weird. And I remember that was the first debate of the 2012 election, the debate that everyone says Obama threw it, to make the election more interesting. He didn't really push back very hard against Mitt Romney. He let Mitt Romney get the upper hand because he thought that would encourage people to get out the vote. We found out that was the strategy. I believe that was revealed in 2012, that was actually the strategy of the Obama campaign, was they wanted to make the election look closer than it was in order to encourage people to go out to vote. They were afraid that Obama's supporters wouldn't go out to vote. So the Obama campaign was always claiming they were losing when they weren't. They were always way ahead in the polls. But in order to encourage voter turnout, the Obama campaign and some of their allies in the media were always trying to make the election look closer than it was. That was very, very bizarre. That 2012 election. That was an interesting election, I will say. I'll get to my personal experience with it later. But the big moment in the 2012 election for the country that just went down, that no one will ever forget about the 2012 election, Republican National Convention, I think it was in Tampa, Florida, somewhere in Florida. The big speech at the Republican convention that year where they nominated Mitt Romney, the big speech was from none other than Clint Eastwood. Do folks remember that? When Clint Eastwood did his performance with an empty chair that was supposed to be Barack Obama. And he said, Barack Obama, I don't think you've been a very good president. Oh, what's that, Obama? No, I can't do that to myself. I need other people to do that, President Obama. What? You got a pretty foul mouth there, Mr. Barack. I don't know why you're cussing up a storm there. oh, geez, Mr. Obama, those are fighting words you're using. He had like an argument with an empty chair that he was pretending was Barack Obama. That was the big classic thing. But I do remember when I watched that speech live, what I do remember about it was there were a couple of lines in that speech that sounded left wing. And I remember at the time watching this and going, wait, what? That was kind of the beginning of me realizing something was off, and I'll get to the circumstances of that speech a little bit later. But I remember watching the Republican National Convention 2012. I'm sitting in my hotel room in North Carolina. I'm watching the convention. In 2012, I'm sitting there watching it, and Clint Eastwood's there arguing with his chair. And Mr. Obama, you've been an awful president. You're kind of a socialist, and I like America. Why do you hate America? Mr. Obama, there's no reason to use such foul language with me there. He's having his argument with his chair. But one of the things in his speech that he said about the chair, and I do remember that, was that he said to the chair, he said, Obama, I remember when you first got elected, everyone was crying. I mean, everybody was crying. I wasn't crying. In fact, I didn't start crying until this year when I saw how many people were unemployed, how many people didn't have jobs. That's when I started crying, Mr. Obama. That's kind of a left-wing line, right? I mean, for years, the Republican line is, oh, get a job, you bum. You don't have a job. It's because you're a loser. It's the American way. But he's talking about the unemployed. I was crying because people don't have jobs. I mean, that sounded a little bit, was that Clint Eastwood or Krusty the Clown? That sounded a little bit like Krusty the Clown from The Simpsons there at the end. But anyway, at this year's Democratic debate, that's a good one, John. That's good, and I'm writing it down. Anyone's got any more super chats, by the way, send them my way, right? I got, we want to have a fun second half of the show. So by all means, and I'm writing this down about Joe Biden's empty chair. Democratic debate. But the other line from that famous Mitt Romney empty chair speech, or no, it wasn't Mitt Romney, it was Clint Eastwood. That famous Clint Eastwood empty chair speech that I remembered is, Obama, you said you were against the war in Iraq, and that was wrong, but you supported the war in Afghanistan, and you supported that one. Well, I don't support the war in Afghanistan. I think you ought to bring those troops home now, Mr. Obama. And the crowd went wild. And I thought, so he's fighting for unemployed. He's crying about unemployment, and he wants to bring the troops home. That doesn't sound right wing. And that was the first hint that something might be off. And thank you, Christina. I do appreciate that. And I'm writing it down. Thank you very much, Christina. And I hope you're in touch with local CPI folks out in the Pacific Northwest, Christina. But anyway, good. It was a good year, I guess. I mean, I will never forget the 2012 Republican convention, really the Democrat convention, because I spent the month. I think it was the month. Was it August? I think it was even early September. I spent that month in North Carolina, organizing and helping build protests against the Democrat National Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, Wall Street South. And I have got to tell you, I was absolutely miserable for that month. I was on staff at that point with the International Action Center. I was a full-time volunteer, I guess you could say. I was working for Ramsey Clark, and I was working with Sarah Flounders and others. And, it was a miserable month. I went down to North Carolina, and I was in an office full of liberal NGO people. And I could not stand those people. We had these offices that we had rented at this like progressive space in this like woke gentrified area in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was like the Friends of the Rainforest or something like that was down the hall from us. And the People's Poverty, Transgender, whatever was down the hall from us. And it was all these people that were getting paid. They were all getting paid to do woke stuff. And I was there, and I was like an actual communist. And these people, I was dealing with these people that were not by any means. And it was not fun at all. It was rather unpleasant. I was very unhappy to be there. And it was just a lot of gossiping, a lot of talking behind people's backs, and a lot of, every time I would start talking about communism, I would get this judgmental, like, we're not interested in all that white man theory. Okay. Like, we're interested, and you would get this, like I was a bad person because I knew about Marxism. I knew about communism. It was a negative experience for me. Just such rude cliquishness. And, all the people down there that were working with us, they were people who went to UNC, UNC Chapel Hill, UNC Charlotte. These are like the Harvards of the South. These are really wealthy trust fund kids who got woke politics out in North Carolina. And, and they're sitting there talking about, their cisgender intersectionality, anti-patriarchy studies and all this crap. And, and they're not communists in any conceivable way. And, oh man, it was a miserable month. I shared a hotel room with a few other people. It was like a hotel, like kind of this rundown hotel that we stayed at, which, they got for a steal because we were there for a whole month. And, oh man, it was not a fun month. And I was sitting there going like, I'm in the wrong group. That's what I was thinking. Like, these people are not communists. And the crazy thing was, it was like, I was there, and it was Workers' World Party people, but it was also people from all these like liberal NGO foundation groups, that were getting Soros money. And I'm sitting there, and I'd go to the office with these people, and it was awful. It was just an awful experience, really. I mean, and it was awful. I mean, it was just really, really awful. But yeah, I mean, I remember, like, and anyway, I remember I was spending that month, and I had my copy of William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals. And I was reading that book in order to keep my sanity, because it was like, this is real Marxism. And I'm surrounded by people that are definitely not that. A couple experiences stand out about that month I spent in North Carolina with these toxic human beings. One thing that stands out from that month that I will never forget is that these people were always saying, you can't talk about communism. We got to be in the closet about communism because it'll scare the liberals away. Oh, no, you can't talk about communism. Can't talk about Marxism. These people were ashamed of being communists. They were self-hating communists, right? They were liberal NGO activists who happened to be in this communist group. They didn't believe in communism. They weren't interested in communism. They were pretty much ashamed to be in this communist group that supported North Korea, etc. And they had it in their head. No one wants to hear about communism. So anyway, North Carolina's Gay Pride event happened, right? Every year in North Carolina, they have North Carolina Pride, annual Gay Pride event. So they had this great idea to get annoying communist Caleb away from everybody. This guy we're dealing with, we're stuck dealing with him. He's obnoxious and socially awkward and rude or whatever. They had this great idea, and that was to send me to North Carolina Pride. And I brought with me 200 copies of the Workers' World Communist newspaper, and I sold them at North Carolina Pride. I sold every single one of them. I walked home from North Carolina Pride with 200 $1 bills shoved into the pockets of my pants, etc. 200. I sold 200 newspapers at North Carolina Pride. I just stood there out in the hot sun, and all I did was say, communist newspaper, and all these young people from the South who went to Gay Pride were interested and paid $1 for it. I believe it was 209, 220 newspapers, well over 200 I sold. And I walked back to them, and I pulled out this big pile of money, all these $1 bills. And I said, This idea you can't talk about communism here in North Carolina, that's bullshit. I just sold 200 copies of a communist newspaper here in North Carolina at Gay Pride. I just stood on the corner, and as the Gay Pride parade went by, I sold them. So this idea that you can't talk to people about communism in the South, oh, it's too conservative here, Caleb, you'll scare them away. No, average people, working class kids, pro-LGBT, slightly liberal people were more than willing to pay $1 for a communist newspaper. I sold 200 copies of the newspaper. 200, well over. It was something like 220. So it was bullshit. And I said to them, this is bullshit. This thing you've been saying, oh, we can't talk about communism and all of that, that's bullshit. The reason we're not talking about communism is because you guys are liberals. You guys are just liberal woke activists. I didn't say this. I didn't have the language for it back then. And you guys don't like to talk about communism. But the idea that people here aren't interested in communism, bullshit. Utter bullshit. I mean, I made $200 in one afternoon at North Carolina Pride selling communist newspapers. And the reason we weren't talking about communism openly is because we were huddled up with the NGO people. That's what it was about. Some of us Tar Heel grads have big student loans. In fact, there were a lot of people in North Carolina who were interested in communism. There was a couple like Enver Hoxha kids in the state who were followers of Enver Hoxha, and these North Carolina people didn't even know who Enver Hoxha, the leader of socialist Albania, was. They're like, oh, there's some weird guy who follows some Eastern European government, like it was like Romania or Czechoslovakia. I'm like, Enver Hoxha? You mean Enver Hoxha, the leader of Albania who aligned with China? They didn't even know who it was. These were awful people. And it's like, it's one thing to have people who maybe they're not fully on board. You got to cooperate with them to do something, organize a protest. But these people had the power. And I actually believed in communism. And these people were marginalizing me. And it was obnoxious. It was utterly obnoxious. The party leadership would just bend over backwards to accommodate these people. Right. And finally, towards the end of this month I'm in North Carolina, finally, we're supposed to have a Marxism school. We're finally going to have classes on Marxism. But who do they let lead these classes on Marxism? Not me, not people who actually believe in communism. They let the people who don't believe in communism lead the classes on communism. I will never forget, they had a class on communism versus anarchism. It was one of the most painful experiences in my life. I was about ready to punch somebody. I was fuming. I was sitting in this class in rage because it's like we're finally talking about Marxism. They're supposed to be giving a class about what's the difference between communism and anarchism. This is what the class was. I kid you not. Someone got up and they said, let's write on the board things that communists say about anarchists. And so they wrote them all down. And they said, now let's write on the board things that anarchists say about communists. And they wrote them down. And then they erased them. I'm like, what was that? And I turned to somebody, I'm like, what is this? Truth and reconciliation or something? Like, what is this? And then they handed out, I kid you not, they handed out little index cards to everyone with the fucking Wikipedia pages of different communist organizations. Seriously. And they had the Wikipedia page for the Revolutionary Communist Party, the first paragraph of it, cut and paste onto a fucking what do you call it? Index card. And one by one, we all got up and read the first paragraph of the index of the Wikipedia pages of the different communist groups. And that was the whole class. And in my room, I was reading William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals. And I was studying the First International and Marx and Bakunin and Proudhon. And then after that, I was studying the Second International and Lenin and the, all. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, is this for real? I'm like, this was a crime against Marxism. I'm sitting here and it's like, the Freedom Road Socialist Organization was founded in 1982. It is a Marxist-Leninist group. The International Socialist Organization was established, the Revolutionary Communist Party, Good question. I'll answer that later. But I'm just sitting there and I'm like, somebody who takes this seriously. It was pretty awful. And it was just like, we're supposed to be teaching our ideology. And instead we had Truth and Reconciliation, where we wrote on the dry erase board things people say about each other. Didn't address any of them. And then they erased it. And then next we all got and read the first page. I mean, it was like, if you take this stuff seriously, if you actually believe in this ideology, and so I spent a month around these liberal NGO people, and it was infuriating. It was utterly infuriating to me. It got a little bit better when the convention started. When the Democrats actually showed up and started having their convention, it got a little bit better. One thing that had been interesting is that, they had been adamant that they would not allow any Occupy camps in downtown Charlotte. There will be no Occupy camps anywhere. As soon as the Democrats got to town, they said, we want Occupy camps, and they moved. The Democrats actually set up their own tents, and they practically begged for there to be an Occupy Wall Street encampment outside the Democratic convention, which I thought was very interesting, because that was the optics that Obama was going for, right? Obama very much was going for, and then they had one night, they had Elizabeth Warren get on the stage, and Elizabeth Warren gave a speech that had absolutely no, she didn't call for free healthcare or free college or any of that. It was just a big speech about Republicans give tax cuts to the rich or something. And then at one point in her speech, Elizabeth Warren shouts, corporations are not people. They're not people. And everyone applauds and people are crying or whatever. And then CNN cuts away to the Occupy Wall Street camp. It's like, see, Barack Obama is the leader of the people's movement. And I remember it was weird, because in the lead up to, protesting the Democratic National Convention, the city in Charlotte was like, you will not set up a single tent in any of our parks. You do that, we will arrest you. Yeah, they were monitoring Facebook, and they printed out tweets that people had made about how they were going to set up a tent. And they're like, you're planning to set up. And then as soon as the Democrats got to town, the Democrats practically demanded that they set up tents and that they have an Occupy Wall Street encampment, because they needed it for the aesthetics of the convention. It was part of the staging. Barack Obama was the leader of the people's movement. I think if I remember correctly, that year they had a bunch of signs out at the convention hall that said, what is it? Osama bin Laden is dead, but Detroit is still in business, or something like that. Something like that. Wasn't it bin Laden dead, Detroit alive, something like that? And it was, they really, really played up their, kind of left-wing, kind of economic populist credentials. But it was all bullshit. It was all just bullshit. And as the convention started, of course, I'm getting calls from Press TV, RT. I'm doing a lot of interviews and stuff. And, I'm thinking, geez, it's weird that international TV wants to have me on, and, and they think I'm capable of doing a good job with this, when, the people locally, think I'm just an idiot and think I'm a weirdo for believing in Marxism. But yeah, that was my experience. And I can tell you, I was never more happy to get out of town. That month I spent in Charlotte, North Carolina was awful. The best night I had was the Rainforest Action Group, the Rainforest Group. They had a reading group of their own. It wasn't part of the Workers' World Party or anything like that. It was just their own people. These were anarchist activists. But they had actual community members from Charlotte, North Carolina, African-American folks, local residents, who came to their reading group to read Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. So I remember I got to go to a meeting of the local reading group, and that was actually kind of fun, because they were genuinely nice people. Southerners, they have a politeness about them, right? And these were genuinely nice people, and they had genuinely gathered to read not such a good book, Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, not a very good book, but they were nice people, and they appreciated that I knew something about these topics. They appreciated that I was polite and I listened to them. And actually, that was probably the best goddamn evening of the whole month I spent in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was the month that I went to the reading group of the non-communists to read Saul Alinsky to talk about rules for radicals. That was actually a pretty good experience. That was actually a pretty good experience. So there you go. But that was a wild time. That was a very, very wild time. I will tell you, I don't normally talk about my dreams, but what the heck? Why not? I had a dream that month I was in Charlotte, North Carolina. And it was as we were getting close to the convention, a lot of people were coming in from around the country, different activists. We were picking people up at the airport. So I had a dream. And the dream was that William Z. Foster was coming to the convention. It was a very strange dream, and that we had picked up William Z. Foster at the airport. Very strange dream. I don't normally dream about historical figures or whatever, but I was reading William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals for the second time, and it was like the one thing about communism that wasn't being suppressed and poo-pooed and spit on by these people. I remember I had this dream about William Z. Foster, flying to North Carolina to attend the convention and us picking him up at the airport. It's a very strange dream. It was a very, very strange dream that I had, that I was really not happy that year. I will say this, which was that, the South has a particularly interesting feel to it, but there is this Southern aristocracy of rich kids, right? There is this, your Southern working class people, black and white, are beautiful. They're amazing. They're nice folks. Now, obviously, Southern white people can be a little bit racist, and there's not a little bit, but and there's a history of obviously very ugly things in the South, and in the South is a little bit more rigid. The death penalty is still used in a lot of Southern states and stuff, but there's just kind of a kindness, kind of a down-home kindness that you get in the South. But these Southern rich kids, I don't know what it is about them, but people from the South who come from money are awful human beings. I shouldn't say that, but there's something about like Southern rich kids. They're like the meanest, nastiest rich kids. I will say that. These people, you'd be in a room with these people, these North Carolina trust fund, UNC rich kids, and you'd introduce yourself. You'd say, "Hi, I'm Caleb. I'm from New York." And they would look at you and be like, and they would like giggle and just walk the other way. Like, that is how fucking rude these people were. Right. And I realize now what that is. There's a certain thing that people who come from money do, like trust fund kids, very wealthy people do. It's just that they don't feel an obligation to recognize everyone in the room. It's a really nasty thing, but it's like, if someone's having a conversation right next to me, I have the right to interject, right? I mean, and I understand it goes both ways. If I'm in your living room, or if I'm standing right next to you having a conversation with one of my friends, and you say, "Well, that's interesting. I heard about that one time." You have a right to do that because I'm having the conversation right in your face, right? If I didn't want you to interfere in the conversation, I would take it somewhere else. We'd step outside. But if people are having a conversation right in your face, you have a right to be part of it. But there's this rich kid thing that they do, where it's like you aren't part of their reality unless they acknowledge you. And what it comes from, and this is shocking to me, it comes from the fact that these rich kids grow up in houses where they have maids who are cleaning the floor, and they have, people doing work and that the help is always around, and they don't have to acknowledge the help. That's what that's about. It's really nasty, right? And it's a really nasty thing these rich kids will do. But you'll be in the room with them. They'll be having a conversation right in front of you. And because you are a human being worthy of respect, you'll say, "Oh, that's interesting." And then they'll look at you like, "Why are you talking? Why are you talking? You're not part of my little, I didn't choose to acknowledge you." It is one of the rudest things. These kids would do that all the time. And I didn't exist, right? They had no reason to say, just basic fucking courtesy these kids didn't have because they're rich Southern kids, right? And, even though they're classist as fuck, they're just rude as hell. Even though they would act that way, they still, they won the woke contest because I will let you know, I just got a degree in like gender and queer studies. And like, I know all about how like racist white men and Judith Butler and intersectionality and bell hooks. And oh my God, it is the weirdest thing, right? That they can be so rude and classist. They can look down on you because you're an actual Marxist, because you're not part of their woke bullshit. And, it's fine because they got an A+ in queer and gender studies and they know all about intersex trans people. I mean, these are awful people. I mean, Southern and okay. It's just not, oh, there we go. Come back to NC, stay away from the wokes next time. Thank you, Mariah. I love North Carolina. A lot of amazing people there, but the rich kids from North Carolina, not so much, right? Not so much. Not so much. But I will say this, which is that I was making some kind of point about this. What was the point I was making? I was making some kind of point. I was making a point. What was the point I was making? I was making a goddamn point and it slipped out of my head. What is the point? What was the point, Caleb? The point. You were making a point, Caleb, and then it slipped out of your head. And now there's another super chat. You're going to even further forget it, but that's okay because we got to have a second half. We got to talk about these things. Lennons imperialism. He describes the ideas of the petty bourgeois, same as modern libertarians who want to go back to free enterprise. All righty. What was the point? There was a point. There was a point I was making somewhere. There's a point. There's a point in all of this. But anyway, North Carolina folks are great. Average people in North Carolina are amazing. But it's the Southern rich kids. Oh, that's the point. So you want to know the dirty little secret? This is the dirty little secret of all of this, right? And I mean, this is like, when I found this out, I was like, are you kidding me? Okay, so I found my way out of the Workers' World Party in 2015, started working for RT in early 2016, whatever. I had my own career, was still trying to figure out. Eventually, I started the Students and Youth for a New America clubs and stuff, but a couple of years later, I think it was 2017, maybe 2018, the Workers' World Party had a very big split. They had two big splits. One split was in Detroit. They drove out the Detroit branch. And then right after that, they drove out like a lot of other people, Baltimore, Los Angeles, other people. When the Detroit people left, they leaked something about those North Carolina people that really just tells you everything you need to know. They revealed what that was all about. These woke people that I had spent like a month or a month and a half of 2012 just being tortured by these obnoxious, rude, classist, anti-communist, smug, awful people that I spent a month with. It was revealed where their funding was coming from. And some of it was coming from the Philip Morris Tobacco Company. Seriously. And some of it was coming from George Soros. And some of it was coming from different manufacturing companies, right? A lot of big tobacco, a lot of tobacco out there in North Carolina. But it was revealed that basically the reason that this NGO grift in North Carolina, in the cities of North Carolina, was there was so much money being handed out. The reason that if you wanted to start organizing Black Lives Matter or trans rights protest in North Carolina, there was money to do that, was because of the fact, can't make this up, they were having a hard time gentrifying. That's what it was really about. Rich hipster kids don't want to move to North Carolina because they think it's the South, which it is. Rich hipster kids think North Carolina is conservative. They think it's a red state. They think that everyone down there is saying, I'm chewing my tobacco and I hate me them homosexuals. I support police brutality, and that's what they think. And so, when they're trying to raise the property values in downtown Greensboro and downtown Chapel Hill and downtown Charlotte, they had a little bit of a problem doing that because all the rich kids didn't want to move there because they thought it was the South, right? They thought it was Bubba's, and I don't like ethnic minorities. I'm from the South. I'm a member of the Ku Klux Klan. That's what they think the South is, right? That's what these rich hipster kids think the South is. So the reason that the money was being handed out, you can't make this up. The reason they were handing out money to these fucking assholes, who I swear, if I see these people again, I hope I don't give them a piece of my mind. I hope that the gentleman in me says, oh, it's good to see you again, and shakes their hand and is polite, but I can't stand these people. The reason they were getting money to do their woke, anti-communist, liberal protests was because they were trying to help big tobacco companies and big banks. Charlotte is the headquarters of Bank of America. Gentrify the downtown areas of these southern cities. That's what it was all about. By having woke activism there and woke protests, by having visible liberal protests in Charlotte and in Chapel Hill and in Greensboro, by doing that, they could help the property values go up and kick the black people who've been living there for generations out and make expensive hipster apartments and expensive fancy hipster bars in the downtown area. So all this woke bullshit that these people were doing, it was all to help big tobacco companies and big banks drive low-income African-American people out to make way for more Southern wealthy trust fund kids. That's what they were doing. These people were it was to help the city improve its woke aesthetics. And that's what they were doing. Right? And you look back on that, and it's like, I look back on that and I just am like, I have never felt more validated in my life. Right? I mean, it was like, oh, wow. Okay. So instead of doing what Caleb did, I went to the Gay Pride March and sold more communist newspapers in a day than they had sold in 4 or 5 years there, and had more conversations with people about communism than they'd had in 4 or 5 years. All these people were doing, it's like, oh, we can't talk about communism, Caleb. It's the South. We just have to kind of pretend to be liberals. And there's a reason. They were just helping gentrify. They were just helping to gentrify and kick out and drive up property values and kick out low-income working class people and pave the way for more hipsters to move in. That's really all they were doing, right? And from what I understand, almost all those North Carolina people have quit the party. They have quit the party. They over the sex, scandal they had in Baltimore or whatever. And I look back on that and I'm just like, I feel so validated. I feel so validated, right? Because it's just like, I was right. I was telling people all along, these people are not communists. What these people are preaching is not communism. and this NGO money that they're bringing in, not good. And I was right. I was right. I was absolutely right, and it's like one of those situations where it's like, I almost don't want to be right, and that's the thing. It's like, you don't want to be right. I don't want to be right. That's my little satisfaction, is I can go, well, I was right. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really help, right? Because wouldn't it be better if they had been communists? Wouldn't it be better if they'd had been doing real revolutionary work? Wouldn't it have been better if somehow they'd been able to get some of that Soros money to use it to do like real organizing? That's not what happened. And I saw that, and I was absolutely miserable in North Carolina for a month and a half. And I was just surrounded by these people who drove me up the wall, and I was being made to feel that I was somehow a bad person. Like there was something wrong with me because I actually believed in the ideology these people supposedly believed in. I was made a pariah among my own comrades. And there we go. And there we go. So, I look back on that month that I spent in Charlotte, and I'm just like, well, that was shitty. And it was a sign of things to come. It was a sign of things to come because, it's only what I pointed to about the woke left revealing itself to be a new form of fascism, about the right wing revealing itself to be the anti-imperialist. I mean, there were some things that happened that year I will never forget. There was an older man who was kind of my mentor, probably one of the best friends I've ever had. And we had a falling out. We stopped being friends in 2016. It was very sad. I'd not had a friend this close, and I lost him. But that night, election night, 2012, when the election happened, that was a sign that I knew something was wrong. This guy was a very smart man, is a very smart man, very well read. He taught me so much about economics and about history and about how to analyze events. Here, I'll write this down. I remember that the year of that election, 2012, I was back in New York. Obama won the election. I was on the phone with him. He was very happy that Obama had won the election. And I couldn't understand that. I mean, it's like, he was happy that Obama had won the election, even though he didn't vote for Obama, even though he's a Marxist. And as he was like kind of celebrating Obama's victory, he started ranting against all the people who voted for Mitt Romney. And he started yelling into his phone. I'm on the phone with him. It's like 2 a.m. He's telling me about the election, how happy he is that Obama won. And he said to me, he listed the number of how many millions of people voted for Mitt Romney. And I'm like, yeah. And he started ranting about how they all had a hole in their head, how awful would you have to be to vote for Mitt Romney? Are these people just complete fools? And he just, getting very rageful and fired up. And I'm thinking like, most of the people who voted for Barack Obama are just as stupid. Like Barack Obama killed Gaddafi and destroyed Libya. Barack Obama is the one who tortured Chelsea Manning, drove Edward Snowden into exile. I mean, I'm sitting there and I'm listening to him just ranting about how Romney voters, anyone who voted for Romney is just scum and garbage. Millions of Americans voted for Romney. How can they do that? Don't they know anything? And I'm thinking like, are they really any worse than the people who voted for Obama? And I remember listening to him just rant, just seethe with hate, just utter hatred for all the Americans who'd voted for Mitt Romney. And I remember thinking, like, something's off here. Something's off. Because, sure, Mitt Romney was putting out more of a free market message, was trying to accuse Obama of not being hawkish enough, not being a neocon, but Obama was just as much a fraud. And if anything, Obama was the more effective evil. Obama bragged about his regime change operations and I remember that was a moment where I thought something's off with these people. Something's off with these people. That was 2012. I started traveling in 2013 and 2014. was when I left the United States and started meeting with revolutionaries around the world that I started to realize what was up. But even then, 2011, 2012, 2011 was the year of Occupy Wall Street. 2012 was the year of the conventions. And it was before that, there was a big protest against the NATO summit in Chicago. And I was full-time staff with the International Action Center, and I was doing a lot of good work. But that's when I was starting to think something's off. Something was off. That's when I started to realize that something was really, really, really off. Something was really, really off. Something was really, really off. Something was really, really off. Yeah. I realized that, I don't know. I started, there were little signs there, and that my political awakening, the climax of my political awakening happened when I was on the ship to Yemen, trying to deliver humanitarian aid to Yemen. That's when I reconnected with God, had my spiritual awakening, converted back to Christianity. But that's also, it was coming back from Iran. After that humanitarian mission, after spending a month in Iran, after that, coming back to the United States, and and just not feeling right in left-wing spaces anymore. And just on the one hand, being very angry at them for how much they were failing, and on the other hand, realizing how inadequate their analysis was, and how what mattered to them was a bunch of woke liberal bullshit and not what I actually cared about. And yeah, that was interesting. So, it's important to reminisce, right? I was on here talking about PBS earlier, talking about painting and Elvis impersonators and PBS. And that got me thinking about the Democrat convention and Clint Eastwood. And that got me thinking about NGOs and all of this. And, it's important to get on here and reminisce, right? It really is. It's important. You want to get on here and reminisce and talk about things. You want to do that. So, yeah, this was an interesting ramble. I talk about all kinds of shit on these live streams. I really do. And I always wonder how much of this gets around, right? I know there's 150 of you watching now. Glad you're all here. Usually it goes up to about 200. Occasionally we've gotten 300 on here. Afterwards, there's between 1,000 and 2,000 people that usually watch every one of these streams. And that's good, and I really enjoy it, right? I mean, it's like we're like a little community here, and I talk about these things, and I mean, I'm giving you my perspective. And times change. Sometimes you reflect on times in your life and you feel differently about them, right? And that that your memories of the past are always tainted by the present. You always take with you the bias of the present. Like I always tell people that like every movie that you see that is about the past, right? Every movie that you see is that's about the past really reflects the time period in which it was made. Reds, classic movie, right? That's the movie about John Reed. It reflects on, it was made in the year of 1980. And you can see it reflects on the the Iran hostage crisis, that it really reflects on that towards the end of the movie. It reflects on the failure of the new communist movement and Euro-communism and the rise of Euro-communism. Reds, yeah, it's about American intellectuals in like the 19-teens. World War I, the Russian Revolution, and the early years of the Communist Party USA, the Communist International, John Reed, the guy who wrote 10 Days That Shook the World. That movie is really, it's 1980. It came out, won Best Director. It was directed by Warren Beaty. He won Best Director for making the movie. And the movie is really, it's like the American establishment attempting to kind of make sense of the American left. That's really what it is if you watch it. right? And the beginning is really about the counterculture and hippies. It's about Greenwich Village. It's about how, Louise Bryant, John Reed's partner, didn't fit in, had a very, authoritarian husband, felt stifled in her house life. So she ran away to Greenwich Village to be a nonconformist with John Reed, and, how they wanted to get involved in causes for social justice. That's about the 60s. That's about the counterculture. Then later in the movie, it starts to be, you see the founding of the CPUSA, and it's really trying to make sense of the new communist movement of the 1970s. At one point, Louise Bryant goes on a rant, like, what's the difference between the Communist Labor Party and the Communist Party, except you're in charge of one and he's in charge of the other. And this is about the 1970s and the sects. It's not about, the difference between the Communist Labor Party and the Communist Party, the two groups that eventually merged to form Communist Party USA. It was about the fact that one was largely non-English speakers and the other was largely middle-class intellectuals who spoke English, right? And that there was like a rivalry between these two groups. There was like a class divide almost. John Reed and his people were in the Communist Labor Party, and Communist Party USA was largely non-English speaking factory workers from Eastern Europe. And there was a rivalry between the two groups, that they were at odds with each other. It was a class divide. It was, there were different reasons people were attracted to the Bolshevik Revolution. But if you watch the movie, it's very much reflecting on all the different communist groups in the 70s that were fighting with each other and how the groups were known to put pressure on people, right? There's a scene where like John Reed is browbeating a guy because he missed a meeting. He didn't show up to meet with a contact, and he's like scolding him, like, don't you have any loyalty or whatever? Who asked for the meeting? So why would he wait for you? You let the whole party down, something like that, and that's supposed to reflect on kind of the cultish atmosphere that developed in a lot of the new communist movement groups, a lot of the Maoist and Trotskyite groups of the 70s. That's what that's about. John Reed starts, when John Reed gets to Russia and they put him on a train and they're taking him around, it's supposed to be like John Reed has good intentions. He believes in workers' rights, but these authoritarian Bolsheviks have taken advantage of him and they're trying to tell him what to do. And that's supposed to be like, it's Euro communism. At the time, you have to remember 1978, the Italian Communist Party, the French Communist Party, the Spanish Communist Party all signed a document denouncing the Soviet Union. And Brzezinski started calling them the Euro communists. And, the big communist parties of Western Europe started to break with the Soviet Union. And you saw that, and that was an attempt. It was like the USA with this Hollywood movie was saying, we don't mind communists. We like people who organize for workers' rights. We like hippies and counterculture people who practice, have multiple wives and don't get married, people, with unconventional ideas, but you don't want to associate with those evil authoritarian regimes, right? Those Bolsheviks, and that's what they're showing. Right? Like that's what they're trying to show. And towards the end, at one point they have Emma Goldman's character, she gives this rant about the Bolsheviks. She's like, it's a system that just doesn't work, John. That's just straight up American anti-communism. And then at one point in the movie, this is very important because if you look at the year it came out, 1980, right? At one point in the movie, John Reed is on the train and they're in the southern USSR and they go to like a place where there's a bunch of Muslims. Right. And they arrive and they're all wearing big turbans and they got swords and they're burning like an image of Uncle Sam. And that is supposed to be, it's like the leftists have hit rock bottom. They're aligned with the Ayatollahs of Iran. They're not socialists. They're not leftists. They're bloodthirsty, reactionary Muslims. And that's what was being said. Christopher Hitchens says that that's why he turned against Marxism, was that the left supported the Ayatollahs of Iran, and that they supported the Iran hostage crisis. And that was what was going on at the time was, as people were saying to the left, it's one thing to support the Vietnamese, it's one thing to support the Cubans, but how can you support the Ayatollahs? How can you support the Ayatollahs? That was the main talking point, right? That these communists, these far leftists, they supported the Ayatollah, who doesn't believe in rock music, who doesn't believe women should not have their heads covered, and they exaggerated. They made all kinds of lies too. They claimed that like music was illegal in Iran, which it wasn't. They exaggerated the conservatism of the Ayatollahs, and it was a way to like ridicule the left. It was a really common ridicule at the left. They were supporting the Ayatollahs of Iran, and that showed that the left just had no principles. They just hated America, right? And if you watch that movie, I feel that movie Reds, made during the Carter administration, last year of the Carter administration, it was very much Hollywood trying to say to communists largely in Western Europe, not communists in America. It was trying to say to communists in Western Europe, we don't have an issue with you. Just stop associating with the Soviet Union. Stop aligning yourself with anti-imperialist countries around the world. Hollywood, we have some love for communists. John Reed, Louise Brandt, they're good people. They're unconventional. They talk about important issues like women's rights and the rights of the working man on the job. There's room for communists in America. Just don't be a tanky. That's kind of the message of the movie Reds. That's what I take from the movie Reds. The message is basically, don't be a tanky. It's okay to be a communist. It's okay to be a leftist. Just don't be a tanky. And that was very much the tone. That's Brzezinski, right? Now Ronald Reagan had a very different tone. It was, America, love it or leave it. But the tone of the Brzezinski, Carter, Eastern establishment that very much played a role in bringing down the Soviet Union, that worked really hard to foment Euro-communism and separate the global communist movement from the Soviet Union. That was largely the way they saw things. That's what I see in the movie Reds. So there we go. Yeah, I mean, and the point that I'm making, is that whenever you reflect on events of the past, you always take with you the bias of the present. And that's important to note, right? So many of the history books you find at Barnes and Noble, I bought a book on the history of the Ku Klux Klan, and the book was about Trump. I mean, it was technically about the Ku Klux Klan, the second coming of the Ku Klux Klan. I used it for the research for the chapter in my book where I talk about Woodrow Wilson and the Klan. But you read that book, the book's about Donald Trump. That's what it's about. It's not about the Ku Klux Klan. She's talking about the history of the Ku Klux Klan to make a point about Donald Trump. And so much of the Barnes and Noble history that you buy is not actually trying to teach you history. It is trying to write from the perspective. The things they choose to emphasize are to make a point about what's going on in the present. And that's a really important thing to remember, that, always look at the publication date of any history book you read. Look at the context in which it was published, because often books of history are written to address ongoing debates. The kind of things that are emphasized in one volume are different than the kind of things that are emphasized in another volume. There's a number of biographies of William Z. Foster, the great American Marxist. One of them is called William Z. Foster and the Tragedy of American Radicalism. The whole book is trying to make a point that the Soviet Union corrupted American communism. It's trying to use William Z. Foster's life to argue that Stalinism, the Soviet Union, the Communist International corrupted American communism. The book has a lot of good information in it, but it's trying to make an anti-communist political point. One thing that's often been pointed out is if you read the history of American communism, there are a million books on the history of the Wobblies, the IWW. There's a million books on the history of Eugene Debs. But the Communist Party USA, not so much. They get nervous, right? And, when you start to have communists that are aligned with existing socialist governments, they get nervous. Right? The CPUSA is always more politically loaded. The Wobblies are great because they were not aligned with any government. They were just protesting for workers' rights. They were against the American government. They got broken up. It's a tragedy. The government broke them up. Howard Zinn loves to talk about Eugene Debs, loves to talk about the Wobblies, but Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States really downplays the role of the CPUSA in the 1930s. He makes it sound like the unemployment councils were not led by the CPUSA, which they very clearly were, right? And that there's a lot of stuff like that. And when you look at academic histories of American communism, it's a lot of stuff like that. One thing, I mean, when I first started fighting with Vosh, right? When I first started fighting with Vosh was saying that that tankies are the same as Nazis. And I just pointed out, I listed all the great American progressives that were tankies. And among them, I listed Angela Davis. And a number of Vosh's fans tweeted at me, Angela Davis wasn't a tanky. Oh my God, you must be retarded. Angela Davis wasn't a tanky. You're stupid. And it's like Angela Davis was like the official presidential candidate and main public face of the Communist Party during the 1970s and 80s. She supported North Korea. She supported the Soviet intervention in Czechoslovakia. She supported the Soviet intervention into Afghanistan. If anyone was a tanky, it was Angela Davis. Now, she changed, and many people think that within the Communist Party, she was playing a negative role. She was trying to push them in a Euro-communist direction, etc. But in her public persona, Angela Davis was definitely a tanky. And these Vosh fans don't know that, because the way they're telling the history of the Black Panthers now, they don't mention that the Black Panthers had a special relationship with North Korea. They don't mention that the Black Panthers, drew heavily from the history of the CPUSA. They talk of the Black Panthers as if they were this group of woke anarchists or something, right? Because it's part of the game, right? That a lot of the documentaries that came out about the Black Panthers and such, they were designed to retell the story of the Black Panthers in a way that makes the wokes look good, and often in a way that was meant to be a dig at Black nationalists. Like, among woke circles, I don't know if you realize this, there is a whole hysterical campaign against old school Black nationalists. They call old school Black nationalists Hoteps, after Imhotep, right? A lot of Black nationalists really admire a very famous, a physician in ancient Egypt, Imhotep. So, and because a lot of Black nationalists talk about Imhotep and hail Egypt and argue the ancient Egyptians were Black and that Africa is the cradle of civilization, the wokes have decided that if you're a Black nationalist and you admire Gaddafi, or, you admire Minister Louis Farrakhan, you're a Hotep, and they are trying to cancel Black nationalists. I talk about this actually in my book. I have a section about Black Lives Matter and about how Black Lives Matter is kind of a counter gang. And I talk about this because it's very interesting. I would argue that before the rise of BLM, there were two distinct wings of the Black liberation movement in the United States. You had the Black nationalist wing, which was the New Black Panther Party, which was Minister Farrakhan, which was the Black Hebrew Israelites. There's many different Black nationalist groups, the Temple of Moorish Science. There's, African People's Socialist Party, the Uhuru movement. There's many different currents of Black nationalism. But overwhelmingly, as a group, I mean, there's exceptions to all of this, right? We're painting with a broad brush. Black nationalists tend to be very in favor of forces around the world that are resisting U.S. imperialism. Farrakhan supported Gaddafi. They admire China. They admire People's Korea. They admire Iran. They admire Venezuela. Black nationalists as a group tend to support countries around the world that are resisting U.S. imperialism. And on top of that, Black nationalists as a group, again, painting with a broad brush, this doesn't apply to the Uhuru movement. There's some very big exceptions to this, but Black nationalists as a group tend to not believe in abortion. They believe abortion is a white man's plot to wipe out, Black people. They tend to not believe in gay marriage and feminism. They tend to think LGBT rights and feminism are an attempt to emasculate Black men, to degrade Black men, to deprive them of their masculine power. That is the Black nationalist wing. Then on the other hand, you have this kind of Black, and they tend to be more working class too. That tends to be more working class people of color that are in this Black nationalist current, right? You go to Cleveland, the east side of Cleveland, you go to Harlem, there's people with literature tables in Harlem that are selling books. That's their kind of politics. But then there's this other current that's more middle class. And Cornel West, you have your Cornel Wests, and you have your, you have Dr. Cornel West, you have, who else? You have Dr. Cornel West, you have, right, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson, Cornel West, Tavis Smiley, and that's a little more middle class, right? And those folks are definitely black radicals, and they definitely talk about racism. They tend to be more in favor of LGBT rights, more supportive of feminism, but they also are way less anti-imperialist, right? They will condemn whoever the USA is condemning. They will join human rights campaigns. At one point, a lot of those folks signed a big petition against Cuba. Cornel West had this big petition denouncing Cuba as a racist country, trying to support like a color revolution in Cuba, calling Cuba racist. That's more the middle class current. They tend to espouse pacifism. They're not as anti-imperialist, but they're more feminist, more pro-LGBT, etc. And that's kind of the divide. You have this middle class black radicalism, and you have this more working class black nationalism. And that tended to be the divide. And those currents, they existed. And there's a whole history of this, like the NAACP, for many years, had a rivalry with the Communist Party USA, with the Nation of Islam, with groups like that. The NAACP was considered the very moderate wing. The CPUSA, and then especially the Nation of Islam, the Black Panthers, were considered to be the more radical wing. So there's a history of this, right? And that the black middle class tends to be a little bit more, more socially liberal, but also a little bit more, not anti-imperialist. And then the nationalist element tends to be more socially conservative, but also way more anti-imperialist and more working class. So you have this divide. And that when I went to Ferguson in 2014, and I made a whole documentary about Ferguson. I went to Ferguson, I interviewed people. The politics I heard in Ferguson was black nationalism. I saw the Nation of Islam. I saw the new Black Panther Party. I interviewed Malik Zulu Shabazz. I heard black nationalism. People were talking about the Illuminati. People were talking about, people were talking about all kinds of stuff. But when BLM really got going, I was hearing the politics of Cornel West. And what I think Black Lives Matter started out as, it was a feeling of like, there's going to be a rebellion against the police state among black people because Obama was unable to address the problem of police brutality, because poverty and police harassment of the black community is intensifying. There is going to be a rebellion of the black community, but they would rather it be led by the Cornel West wing that is not anti-imperialist than by the black nationalist current. That's how it started. Then BLM morphed into something completely different. And if you listen to Simone Sanders, and if you listen to a lot of the staffers, the people who work for Black Lives Matter Incorporated, they ain't Cornel West. Let me just put it that way. They're certainly not black nationalists. They can't stand black nationalists. Black nationalists are a bunch of hoteps. They can't stand them, blah, 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 blah. But they're not Cornel West either. These people are just, I don't know, they're a synthetic creation, right? They know liberal ID poll. They have gone to workshops where they've relived their painful experiences, their trauma related to racism. They've relived it. They've experienced it, they are angry at white America for being racist. And that is the extent of their political development. And it is disappointing to see, because Cornel West, as much as, again, he's not as anti-imperialist as Minister Farrakhan, he's not stupid. He's a revolutionary. He understands politics. He's a founder of the DSA. And, the classic story I heard, one of my colleagues, another journalist that I know, she went to a college. There was a college in some state, somewhere. And it was revealed that college, the foundations of that college, had been paid for with slavery. And so these students were protesting, saying that black students should get free tuition at this college because the college had been paid for with slavery. Well, that's a fair argument. I'm not against it. But this woman, who was a woman of color, mind you, she asked them, she said, in most countries in the world, they have free college for everybody. Do you think they should have that here in the United States? And these students who were BLM, they were trained in this kind of new woke ideology, said no. No, white people shouldn't get free college because white people's lives are too good and that white people should have to pay more to make up for their privilege. We should get it for free. That's Cornel West would never say that. Minister Farrakhan would never say that. That is that kind of politics that you just heard there. That is a purely synthetic thing, right? I mean, when every other major country in the world has free college, except for like Britain is starting to move away from that, you know, anyone who knows anything about politics is going to be like, yeah, college should be free, but giving free tuition to black students because this college has a history of slavery is like a step in the right direction. But these students actually said no, right? That is synthetic, right? And that, it's been revealed a lot of the people that are employed by Black Lives Matter Incorporated are former Teach for America teachers. That's where they were found. When you take Teach for America, they give you like a psychological test. They evaluate you. There's thousands of people who went into that program, and that they found a crew of people who had the right psychological profile from Teach for America, and they made them the core of the Black Lives Matter Incorporated organization. And this is the interesting thing because right now, and again, I don't get into too much detail, but, Christian Parenti, the son of Michael Parenti, he revealed that one of the exercises that they do at woke shop training, this is fascinating, right? I thought this was going to be a short point, but here I got plenty to talk about, right? One of the exercises they do at woke shop trainings, it's called the privilege walk. And it's like an exercise where you take a step forward based on how much privilege you have. It's kind of a guilt trip that they run. Right. It actually comes from reevaluation counseling. And what is reevaluation counseling? Well, reevaluation counseling is the communist breakaway from Scientology. Right. I know this sounds like too wacky to even be, this is like beyond, right? And it's like, what are you talking about, Caleb? The communist breakaway from Scientology. When L. Ron Hubbard started Scientology, it was originally called Dianetics. And there was a guy who was a co-founder of Scientology with L. Ron Hubbard. His name was Harvey Jackins. You can Google him. Harvey Jackins. And Harvey Jackins, he was a co-founder of Dianetics with L. Ron Hubbard. But L. Ron Hubbard got paranoid. And he made a ban on any communists in Scientology because he thought the Soviet Union was out to get him. L. Ron Hubbard apparently thought the Soviet Union was trying to assassinate him or something. So it's actually still in the rules of Scientology. It's like in one of their rules, no communists are allowed. They ask you like when they're screening you and it's like, are you a member of any communist organization? It's still in their rules. So Harvey Jackins got the boot. He got booted out of Dianetics by L. Ron Hubbard. So he started reevaluation counseling. And reevaluation counseling it's basically Scientology, but it doesn't call it that. It uses it uses the same techniques that Scientology uses, where it has people relive their traumatic experiences and get kind of hypnotized about that. It's the same techniques. But it's called reevaluation counseling. It's still around. And actually, it's now run by Harvey Jackins' son. His son runs it now, from what I understand. And apparently a lot of the exercises that they do in woke shop trainings, where they have people relive their trauma and get very emotional and upset, apparently are activities that were originally practiced in, in Harvey Jackins' reevaluation counseling, which is very wild. The other thing is that there's a group called BAM. Do people know about BAM? By Any Means Necessary? That is another group, right, that I knew about them from when I was doing activism in Detroit. They're in Oakland, California. They're in Detroit. They're called By Any Means Necessary, and they're like a youth activist group. It's quietly controlled by Trotskyites. They used to be part of something called the Revolutionary Workers League. It's called, By Any Means Necessary. And they recruit like high school aged kids, and they recruit them and have them protest against people that are accused of being racist. And they also do a similar thing. Like the way they recruit is they will go to a high school, they'll hand out leaflets. Have you ever been discriminated against? Have you ever felt that you were treated unfairly on account of your race or your gender? They'll invite people to these little kind of open houses. And then they'll have very emotional meetings where people will start crying and get very emotional. And these are like high school kids. These are minors. These are underage kids, very, impressionable, and they've had hard lives, no doubt, and they will get people to kind of have these very, very emotional experiences. And that's a way to gain power over somebody, right? If you can re-traumatize somebody, if you can get someone to like open up and bear their trauma, that's a way to gain power over somebody. And there's a lot of criticism of BAM, and I've talked to, there's a number of people. I was in the Workers' World Party for many years. There were ex-BAM members in Workers' World Party who talked about it, how it was like they would, they were young, they went to your high school age, they would go to these meetings, and people would start crying and talking about, negative experiences and discrimination. And then they would like mobilize them to go to these events, go to town hall meetings, and like stand on chairs and scream and yell and all of that. And that was a similar kind of thing. It reminds you of what was being done by reevaluation counseling. And so those kind of techniques are what is used with the inner core of BLM. And I'm talking about Black Lives Matter Incorporated, mind you. Many people, including myself, believe in the principles of the Black Lives Matter movement. We're opposed to police brutality. We think that, what was done to Trayvon Martin, what was done to, Ramarley Graham and so many others was clearly wrong. But the organization that is funded by Soros, Black Lives Matter Incorporated, the inner core of it are people that are kind of, their trauma, their pain is kind of manipulated, and they are not very informed about politics. And it's just kind of like they kind of, and it's very interesting. I talk about it in this book. But anyway, we've gotten way off topic here. I'm just kind of rambling tonight, and that's fine because I can talk about this stuff all the time. We were talking about North Carolina, and we're talking about all kinds of stuff. We're talking about the movie Reds, and I'm still in my suit, right? I didn't even get a chance. I just walked in the door. I barely had time to go to the bathroom before I got on here because I was late. I was late coming home from Manhattan. I had to film my story. I had to go meet my other friend. So yeah, there you go. You all got an earful tonight. It's weird. Sometimes I get on here and I have a plan of what I'm going to talk about. And tonight I didn't really have a plan, right? I just kind of came in here. I sat down. I started talking about PBS and telethons. And then I started talking about, 2012 elections and all kinds of things. Maybe that's, when I get on here and I just talk, right? That's some of the better content here. So I hope you liked it tonight. This was a lot of fun, right? We talked a lot about a lot of things. Some people saying commie inside baseball. I see the comments. Whatever. That's what you're here for. You love that. You love it. That's why you're here. Come on. You love commie inside baseball. You love it. That's why you're here. Don't give me that. We all love it. All 161 of you watching this. You love commie inside baseball. You love lefty gossip. You love me bitching and moaning and complaining about my negative experiences in different communist groups. You love me. You love it. That's why you're here. Come on now. It's been how many years? This is live 519. And you just now are complaining about that. You love it. Don't give me that. You love it. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Woo. Let's do it, folks. Let's do it. Let's names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you, and then I'll start answering super chats. This has been fun. This is great. There's nobody I would rather spend Friday night with than you guys. Seriously. You guys are awesome. This is our thing. This is our special evening chat. I'm wearing my suit. I'm drinking my unnamed water beverage. Names and locations, folks. Let's chat. Let's call you out as I see you. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. We got Killian from Milwaukee. We got Christian from New Jersey who loves the inside baseball. You love it more than Babe Ruth, right? We got JT24 in Mississippi. We got Mark in Utica, New York. We got Sam in West Virginia, Temple City, California, John McCarthy in Chicago. We got Saviero in Mexico, Zephyr in Eugene, Kakalaki. Wow, I bet it hit home for you. Patch in Arizona, St. Louis, Missouri, Tristan in Maryland, Patch in Arizona, Annie in California. There we go. Colin in Greensboro. Alex from Brazil, Heidi in Edinburgh, Christina in Portland, Jonathan C. in Los Angeles, Briggy in Pennsylvania, Bob Troy in New York, Peter Coffin is in Florida, Keith Preston is in Richmond, Virginia, Noah is in Boston. We got Pios from Catalonia, Spain. He's watching while he's studying for his exams, and he loves to listen to what I have to say. Jonathan Mahari, Damien in Ottawa, Canada, Jonathan Mahari in Sweden, Dante from Atlanta, Deb in Mexico City, Mariah in North Carolina. But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first and all pure, and then peace-loving. David Fox is cold in Bendigo, Australia. Rice from Adelaide, Australia. I'm having a great time, and so are you. And that's why you're hitting the like button, and that's why we're all here. We're all having a great time. We are all having a great time. We're all having a great time. Oh, boy. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Kinky is in Cosa Nostra, right? Jamie is in St. Paul. Welcome, Jamie. All right, I'm going to start answering super chats. Folks, I always have been saying this, and I just want to remind you again. I'm just going to remind, yes, you do love it, Funky, and so do I. Folks, I just do want to remind you that, like I always tell you, I've been saying this at the beginning of the super chat section of our show. I've been saying this. I'm going to say it again just because it bears repeating. That many people listen to these live streams. Usually there's 1,000 to 2,000 people who listen to each of these streams. Sometimes it's closer to 3,000. Sometimes it's closer to 1,000. But 1,000 to 2,000 watch each of these. Those of you who are watching now, you are the lucky 10%. Because the people who watch this afterwards have no way to influence what I say. None. They just have to take it or leave it. Right? They just hear me answer the questions, whatever. But you who are watching now, you have the ability with your super chats to change the course of this live stream. You can make this live stream go one way or another way. You can select the topic of conversation. You have the power at your fingertips to send a super chat and get me talking about whatever is interesting to you. So because of that, you're very lucky. You have an ability that other people who watch this afterwards, the people listening right now while they're taking a shower tomorrow morning, the people driving to work and listening to this, the people on their way to the gym tomorrow, the people that are cleaning their bedroom while they listen to me ramble about Harvey Jackins, they don't have that ability, but you do. You have the special ability to influence the course of this live stream. So I recommend that you use it. You are listening here late tonight, send me a super chat so that I can talk about what you want me to talk about. That is my advice to you. And now I'm going to start answering super chat questions. Joe Biden's empty chair at this year's Democratic debate. Yeah, Biden says no debates, but Marianne Williamson and RFK should have a debate anyway. The fact that the Democrats are not going to have any debates and Biden won't debate, I mean, that is just a complete slap in the face. The majority of Democrats, by a lot, do not want Joe Biden to run. Joe Biden is wildly unpopular with the U.S. public, and they're banking on him winning by default. They're assuming Trump won't be able to run. They're assuming the other Democrats won't get enough press because there won't be any debates, and Biden will just win the White House by default. And that is slimy. And honestly, many Americans can see right through that. And I mean, I would suspect that the Democrats have some kind of savior in the wing. You know, they're going to persuade Biden to step down because, I mean, you want to talk about a situation, you know, I mean, it's on the level of, you know, when Gerald Ford was president, he was wildly unpopular. And one of the big talking points against Gerald Ford was he was the only president in American history no one ever voted for. right? Gerald Ford was never elected president or vice president. Richard Nixon got elected president with Spiro Agnew as his vice president. Spiro Agnew stepped down because of scandals. And then after that, Richard Nixon stepped down and we got Gerald Ford. And Gerald Ford was wildly unpopular because nobody ever voted for him. And, I mean, if we have a situation where Biden just kind of wins by default because Trump isn't allowed to run, the Republicans can't nominate anyone more popular than Trump, and the Democrats aren't allowed to have a real primary. And yeah, it's not going to be a pretty 4 years. You think things are going bad now? You think people are mad now? I mean, U.S. leaders, honestly, maybe we want them to do that because it'll just reveal how rigged the whole damn thing really is. But, I'm not trying to do their homework for them. But in terms of morale in the country, in terms of people feeling good about the system and having faith in their leaders and such, if we get a Biden lame duck after an election like that, yeah, not gonna be good. All right, next question. Christina says that I have a nice suit. Thank you, Christina. I do appreciate it. One of these days I'm going to need to buy a new suit. I haven't bought a new suit in a while, but this is my suit. Got a couple other suit jackets in the closet. I have a couple other black suit jackets. I have a blue suit jacket, and I have my light blue suit jacket, and those are my suits, right? I've always wanted to have a white suit coat. I've always thought that white suit coats look really cool, but I've never had one. So one of these days, maybe they'll be back in style again, but there you go. All right, next question. Some of us Tar Heel grads have big student loans. That was Mariah. And Mariah, I do, again, you always got to be careful when you generalize on these streams. I was ranting against Southern rich kids from North Carolina. There's a lot of good. I'm sure there's a lot of really polite, nice Southern people of wealth, of means. You know what I mean? And you can never generalize like that. It's never good to generalize. I will say I don't appreciate that thing they do where they don't acknowledge you. I don't like that. But there may be people who act that way who learn. And they've acted that way for a while, and then they learn not to do it. And that's the thing about these streams. It's fun when I get on here and ramble and get all over the top, but we do want to realize, look, I've been an asshole. There are things that I have said. In fact, there's ways I acted during the events that I described on this stream that I regret. Honestly, there are ways I conducted myself. There are interactions I've had that I regret, right? We all make mistakes. And and people always say, I never admit I made any mistakes. I admit I made mistakes all the time. In fact, a lot of these live streams is talking about the tactical and political mistakes, the confusion that we've had. I am the first to admit that I have mistakes, but I don't tolerate bullshit. Right. And I mean, when a lot of the criticism that's directed at me is just pure bullshit. I am not a white supremacist. I never will be one. I never have been one. My wife is not white. I have videotaped acts of police brutality to get people acquitted in court. I am not a fucking white nationalist. So if anyone comes at me with, well, you wave an American flag, so you're a white nationalist, I'm not going to give them like, oh, that's something I ought to think about. I'm going to say, shut the fuck up. Okay. You can disagree with me about the American flag, whether it's appropriate or not, but I'm not a fucking white nationalist. So don't give me that. Well, you talk to Dugin. Dugin's, that's not a legitimate criticism. Dugin is an important intellectual in Russia, which is one of the most, probably the most important anti-imperialist country right now. So if you are trying to cancel me because I talked to Dugin, who ain't a fascist, who wrote his fourth political theory, making clear he is neither a communist nor a fascist, he rejects both of those, and if you attack me over that, after the Ukrainian Nazis murdered his daughter, you expect me to take that seriously? I don't. Right? Like, and that's the thing, is it's like I'm open to legit critiques, but not bullshit. And you got to draw the line somewhere. If someone's critique of me is that I sat next to Dugin, I'm not going to take that seriously. If someone's critique of me is that I'm a white nationalist because I wave an American flag, which FYI, just so you know, just mentioning, people who call themselves white nationalists, what they want is a separate country or quote unquote homeland for white people. So they would not be waving an American flag. They would be wanting to break away from the United States because they want a separate white territory or something like that. So the idea that American flag equals Nazi is dumb. That doesn't even make any sense. It equals white supremacist, white nationalist. That doesn't make any sense, right? The American flag defeated the Nazis in alliance with the Soviets and the Chinese in World War II. Like, oh, well, he was an American flag. That's Nazi. The fact that smart people like Danny Haiphong spent months making videos claiming that patriotic socialism is actually white nationalism, which is the dumbest thing. I mean, and it's like, these are intelligent human beings. I'm not going to take that seriously. I'm not going to respect that, right? If you spend months and months making videos claiming that I'm actually a white supremacist, when you know, based on certain family connections, that I've always been a Marxist, that I was a member of a Marxist group for many years, that if anyone has credentials as a Marxist activist, it's me. I'm not going to respect you. So no, Danny, I don't respect you. No, Danny, I don't appreciate that. You can criticize me all you want, but if you claim I'm a white nationalist, fuck you. Right. And that's the thing. Criticism, right? Maybe we could have done this differently. Maybe we could have done that differently. And we've adjusted. We've done things in different ways. You got to learn from your mistakes. At our CPI conferences, we have the flag ceremony, which is awesome. However, we knew very well that if we had done the flag ceremony at our February 19th reception with Scott Ritter, it wouldn't have gone over, right? That wouldn't have gone over with that crowd of people that came in from the Rage Against the War Machine rally. They wouldn't have appreciated that. Now, the people who came to our conference, they knew what they were coming to. But the people who just came because we had free food and we had Scott Ritter, they didn't know what they were going to, and they would have been like, what the fuck is this? So we didn't do it, right? Because we think about these things. Right? We tend to think about these things, right? People are allowed to have their own opinion, but come on now. Some people I'm going to take seriously and some I won't. But there you go. There you go. All right. What did Ramsey Clark think of these NGO people? He never met them. Ramsey Clark, he was older at that point. And he was living in his apartment. He was taking care of his daughter who was disabled. And I would occasionally go over to Ramsey Clark's apartment, deliver stuff to him, bring him documents, bring him food and such. And, but Ramsey Clark didn't really interact with these people very much. He didn't really interact with them. There weren't that many people, who actually had the opportunity to sit down with Ramsey Clark. I don't think he knew very much of what was going on at that point. Ramsey Clark, he would do a press conference every so often. We would have like a very big press conference about Syria, about Egypt and stuff, where Ramsey would come and make a statement, but I don't think he knew much of what was going on inside the group. And John, who asked the question, he pointed out how weird it was in the 90s because Ramsey Clark was very good friends with Lyndon LaRouche. He was Lyndon LaRouche's lawyer. But yet the International Action Center, which Ramsey Clark was the director of, would escort LaRouche people out of events and chant racist, sexist, anti-gay, Lyndon LaRouche, go away, and chase them out of events when they came. And that didn't make any sense. And that the International Action Center was Workers' World Party people. Right. It was Brian Becker, Sarah Flounders, Larry Holmes, Teresa Gutierrez. It was them. It was like an NGO that Ramsey Clark kind of set up. And, but the day-to-day activities of it were run by Workers' World Party people. At one point, they had separate offices. The Workers' World Party had one office. The IAC had another office. By the time I was in the Workers' World Party, they had one loft that was the IAC loft that also doubled as the headquarters of the Workers' World Party. So there you go. And I remember I moved out of that loft. That had been the loft they'd been in for many, many years. And I remember I moved them out to the loft that they are currently in. I was part of that. And I got a lot of good books from that move. But one of the saddest things was that at that old loft that they had on, it was near Union Square. It was like on 17th Street. They had so many amazing Marxist books. They had the complete works of Kim Il-sung. They had the complete works of Marx and Engels. They had the, 2 sets of the complete works of Lenin. they had all kinds of very important Marxist texts. They had books from other Marxist parties. They had the works of Trotsky. They had the works of, the RCP, all of their books. They had all the books of Communist Party USA. They had this huge collection of Marxist books. When they moved to the new loft, we put all those books in a storage locker. They didn't want them there. And I remember saying, well, like, what if, aren't we a Marxist group? Don't we want people in our group to come and see that we have Marxist books? And their attitude was, they said, no, we're not an intellectual group. We attract activists, and that was their thing. They wanted to recruit those NGO type people, and, there were a lot of books they were throwing away or going to leave in the storage locker that I got my hands on. So that was pretty decent. It was good that I got my hands on some books, Marxist books I wouldn't have gotten, but it's just sad that they didn't want them. Right? Where, there's many people watching this stream who would love to read some of those books. So there you go. It's very sad. The other thing is that, there are hours and hours of audio tapes and reel-to-reel audios and videotapes of Sam Marcy talking. And, I think it's largely because of the work we've done on these streams that any of that. They've started to put some of that stuff up on the internet. And that's because I leaked a lot of it. I had some tapes and I just started leaking them on the internet. And I think that scared them and set them off. And so they've started putting some of that out there. But like, they don't want that stuff out there because they want to control the history. They want to control the narrative around their history. So there you go. There you go. All righty. What's the difference between a president and a secretary general? These are executive titles, right? An executive is a person who is the functioning face of an organization. In a corporation, you tend to have a chief executive officer, a CEO. In a nonprofit, you tend to have a director, right? And in a what do you call it? In a federal system, is that what they call it? A federal system, you tend to have a president. In a parliamentary system, you tend to have a prime minister. The title of general secretary, from what I understand, was originally invented to be a title for Joseph Stalin. And that the Communist Party USA would always have two executives. It would have the chairman and the general secretary. And it was never, both of those ranks were equal. You had a central committee on the Communist Party, and the Communist Party would have a chairman or a chairwoman and a general secretary. But it was always clear one of them was the boss and one of them was not. And that was always clear. For many years, Earl Browder was the general secretary and William Z. Foster was the chairman. But it was very clear in those years that Earl Browder was in charge and William Z. Foster was being marginalized until 1945 when the party rank and file overthrew Earl Browder. And that's a weird, peculiar aspect of the Communist Party's history, was that they had these two equal titles, chairman or chairperson and general secretary, but they were never equal, right? And that's particularly interesting. They were never equal. So I think that's particularly interesting. Next question. This person said, I think we need a U.S. version of Mao to bring about land reform and a cultural revolution. Thoughts on Deng Xiaoping and U.S. manufacturing? Well, first of all, don't say we need an American version of Mao, right? The Chinese Revolution was uniquely Chinese. China's historical circumstances were very unique to China, to the time period, and they gave birth to Mao. And the land reform was largely because China was still a feudal society. Most of the population were peasants. And the Cultural Revolution was a nightmare. The Cultural Revolution was a very disastrous event that is universally recognized in China as a horrendous moment in their history. So I don't agree with you there. Land reform in the United States, bringing back the small farmer, I think would be a great thing. Small farmers are a big part. Oh boy. Small farmers are a big part of American culture. And I think that part of American socialism might be the revival, the breaking up of agribusiness and the giant factory farms of agribusiness, reviving the American small farmer. And a small farmer now can produce a lot more as they're learning. Russia is having these huge harvests because one farmer can produce way more because of technology. Some of these farmers, they use satellite technology to grow their crops. And that with modern computers, farming is very advanced. So one person with a big tract of land and a lot of machines can produce a lot of food. Land reform, it would be American style land reform. I don't think it would be every individual person getting their individual tract of land. It might be that, one person becomes, one family takes control with AI technology over a very large swath of territory that produces soybeans or, onions or grapes or whatever, right? And I think with artificial intelligence, you talk about mechanized agriculture. I mean, in our times, computers can ultra mechanize agriculture, and that, having Americans whose job it is to, have huge acres of land that they run with artificial intelligence and with robots. I can see that happening in a socialist society right now in the United States. I don't know if you know about this. This is the irrationality of capitalism. Most farmers get a check from the government for not growing food. The government of the United States pays farmers not to grow food. If they have a certain amount of land, the government gives them a cash bonus, a cash incentive if they don't utilize all of it. And the reason they do this is because they want to keep the price of dairy, the price of corn, the price of grain high. And this is a real policy that the American government has. Farmers get a check. The government compensates them for not growing food as a way of keeping agricultural prices high. Right? This is to deal with the problem of overproduction. This is what I'm always telling you guys about. This is what the whole first chapter of this book is about. The tendency of the falling rate of profit, right? That basically right now in America, with all the land we have, we could very easily be producing a huge amount more food than we do already. However, if we produced the amount of food America was capable of producing, the price of food would plummet and the farms would all go out of business and we'd have an economic crisis. And so in agriculture in particular, there is an insane amount of government efforts to keep the price of food higher. They buy cheese and bury it in a cave in Missouri. I love to talk about this cave in Missouri where they bury cheese. I Google it. It is one of the most insane things I've ever seen. Springfield, Missouri cheese cave. It is utterly insane, right? Go and read about it. It is, 7 million pounds of dairy. I will link you. It is nuts. It is utterly nuts, right? But I mean, they buy milk just to pour it out. Nelson Peary in his autobiography, he describes how during the Great Depression, Roosevelt created the Works Progress. Before he created the Works Progress Administration, he created the American Department of Agriculture. One of the first things they did was they bought half the cows in the country and killed them. And then they poured lime on the bodies of the cows and buried them. They poured lime on the bodies, on the corpses, so no one could dig it up for the meat. Why did they do this? To drive the price of cattle up, to drive the price of beef up, to keep farms from collapsing, because all over the Great Depression, all over the country during the Great Depression, farms were collapsing. And so in order to stimulate the price of beef, Roosevelt sent the Department of Agriculture out to kill half the cows in America to double the price of beef so that farmers wouldn't go out of business. That's insane. That's utterly insane. And there's a huge amount of stuff like this to deal with the problem of overproduction. And in a world where people are hungry, or we have malnutrition, especially since the pandemic, this is insanity. But it's what you have to do in a capitalist system where overproduction, the inability of the worker to buy back what he produces, this is the insanity of capitalism. This is the insanity of capitalism. You get rid of capitalism now. This whole thing about everyone starves in socialism. You get rid with the agricultural technology that we have here in the United States. You got rid of capitalism. World hunger would be over tomorrow. Boom. World hunger would be over tomorrow. Little known fact. Everyone says that Xi Jinping, the president of China, is just so anti-American. He hates America. He's a commie. Well, that's bullshit, because Xi Jinping, part of his claim to fame is that when he was a young man in his 20s, they flew him to Iowa, to Muscatine, Iowa, and he lived in Iowa, and he studied American farming techniques. And that was a pivotal moment in his life when, in the early 1980s, the young Xi Jinping got flown to America, and he slept in a farmhouse, the farmhouse of an American family, and the American family, the kids, he slept in the kid's bedroom with Star Trek wallpaper. The kid had Star Trek wallpaper. Xi Jinping slept on a bed in an American farmhouse in Iowa with Star Trek wallpaper. And he went to America to study American farming techniques. And this is considered to be a pivotal moment in Xi Jinping's career. So much so that there is a model. They have built a model of the farmhouse in Iowa. They have built a model of it in China. And Chinese people pay money, buy tickets to walk into the recreation of the Iowa farmhouse that Xi Jinping stayed in. They go upstairs, they walk into the bedroom with the Star Trek wallpaper that looks exactly like when Xi Jinping slept there. I am not kidding you. So if you think that Xi Jinping, the communist in China, you think he's anti-American? No. A whole big part of his resume is that he lived in Iowa and he studied American farmers. He slept in the bedroom of an American teenage boy with Star Trek wallpaper. I am telling you, Xi Jinping is not anti-American. Don't let anyone ever tell you that. One of the most important things about him in China is that he lived in America and that he understands America. And this family that he stayed with in Iowa, they are celebrities in China. They have gone on speaking tours in China. They have given interviews about what young Xi Jinping was like. This family in China, they didn't know what they were getting into. They thought, hey, there's some Chinese kid wants to come over and study your farming techniques. Okay, they didn't know what they're getting into. That kid grew up to be the president of China. And that family, that farming family from Iowa, they're famous in China now. So don't let anyone ever tell you Xi Jinping is anti-American. Anyway, next question. All righty. Lennon's imperialism. He describes the ideas of the petty bourgeois as modern libertarians who want to go back to free enterprise. Well, it's not just libertarians, but yes, right? That is a long-standing feature. Libertarianism is one version of it, but petty bourgeois politics in America for many generations. We're talking about Robert La Follette or Bob La Follette, who was a very well-known populist. We're talking about the populist movement. The populist movement, it was called. A lot of times their rhetoric was, we used to have good capitalism. We used to have responsible small businesses that were loyal to the community. But we don't have that no more. Now we have monopolies and trusts, right? And many populists of a middle-class variety. Ralph Nader used to talk that way. And not always did these people put forward a libertarian view. You know, the populists, they wanted to nationalize the railroads. They wanted a silver standard as opposed to the gold standard. You know, a lot of times people with that view wanted things that were kind of progressive. You know, Ralph Nader, he wanted to regulate big business more. He wanted to break apart the big monopolies. You know, libertarians have one version of that, right? We need to go back to the Gilded Age. We need to get rid, you know, they have a particularly right-wing, free market, Austrian school version of that. But that tends to be a lot of politics in the United States historically. You know, that's how they've talked. So it's interesting to think about. You know, but there you go. All right, next question. They succeeded in gentrifying. Working people can't afford to live in North Carolina's urban centers. The transit's been shut down, etc. I'm so sorry to hear that. And again, you don't want to be happy about these kind of things. I wish they didn't suck. I wish they had done real communist work. I wish they'd found a way, even in spite of, whatever. I wish they'd found a way to maneuver to do real communist work, but they weren't these people. That's not who these people were. So it's unfortunate. How do you explain communism to Americans? That's a good question, right? I mean, that's what we like to do on here. There's many different ways to go about it. And I'm forced to think of, I don't know if you saw the movie Trumbo about Dalton Trumbo, when his daughter says, "Daddy, what's a communist?" And he says, "Well, my daughter, if you had a friend who forgot his lunch and didn't have lunch at school, and you had your lunch, would you share your lunch with the other kid?" "Yes, Daddy, I would." "Well, then you're a communist." It was a sweet line in the Trumbo movie, but that's not how I would explain it. I would explain it this way. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Right now, we have a government that fights for the big corporations, that fights for the big monopolies. And we have a government that sometimes just sits back and lets everything go to hell. But imagine that we had a government that kicked Jeff Bezos' ass, that kicked Bill Gates' ass and fought for us, and built new highways and built new schools and built new high-speed railway. Imagine we had a government that took control of the oil, and the wealth of the oil started going back to the people and going into building a stronger country. Imagine we had a government that controlled the banking system and made sure the banks were facilitating economic growth and lending money to Americans to start new businesses and to start new, buy fancy new homes and build the economy. Imagine we had an economic bill of rights that Americans, by right of their birth, had jobs and healthcare and education. Imagine we had a government of action that fought for working families. Right now, we have a government that fights for Bill Gates. We have a government that fights for Warren Buffett. We have a government that fights for the Rockefellers and the DuPonts and the Carnegies, that fights for Walmart and Amazon. But imagine we had a government that fought for us against those people. Right now, we have the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Imagine we had the dictatorship of the proletariat, right? I tell people that, if you're a parent and it's wintertime and your kid is going to school every day without a hat and gloves, if you're a parent and your kid is going to school and they don't have a lunch to eat, you can be arrested. They're not arresting you for what you did. They're arresting you for what you didn't do. They're arresting you for criminal neglect. And at this very hour, I charge the government of the United States with criminal neglect, with our water not being purified, with our railroads falling apart, derailings happening all the time, with our power plants crumbling, with our roads in shambles, with our healthcare system a disgusting ripoff. I charge the government of the United States with criminal neglect. It is in complete dereliction of duty. It is not providing for the general welfare of the American people. The American people need jobs and schools and education. We need a government of action to fight for working families. Hope that answers your question, Gabby. Thoughts on the Durham report revealing the security state manipulated our politics, destroying our political leader? There you go. I can certainly talk about that. Thoughts on the Durham report? I'll send a quick message here. So there you go. There you go. Thank you for that, Briggy. All right, next question. Did you see the horrible Crystal Ball RFK interview? I did. And I mean, she's just baiting him. You said things you're not allowed to say about vaccines. And then he starts to say, well, is there anything I said that's false? Or no, I didn't. No, I know you like know a lot about this and stuff, and I don't, but like you like talked facts that you're not supposed to, like you broke like the rule. I mean, it was disgusting. She was just baiting him. I hate that. And it used to be, cancel culture. It really started before social media got going. The neocons were canceling leftists. You had David Horowitz, and they would do a news story of, college professor says America is involved in terrorism. And I'm sitting there watching my TV, and I'm like, America is involved in terrorism. But they don't ever talk about that. They're like, he said something you're not allowed to say. He's un-American. That's what she did, right? She didn't ever debunk anything that he said. She just baited him on saying it. And it's like, you said something you're not supposed to say. You're bad. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. I used to love Christopher Hitchens. Now I cringe to think of it. Do you have any beliefs you used to regret? Well, I'm similar to you. I was a new atheist when I was in high school. I was surrounded by evangelicals. And I was very frustrated with them. And how every conversation about politics immediately turned into a conversation about the Bible. And I would get very frustrated with them. I probably sounded like Christopher Hitchens if you'd have talked to me when I was in high school, because I was just so frustrated with people using religion as their excuse to be stupid. I am a religious person now, right? But some people, I don't know if they do it anymore because now they're so on the defensive, but it seemed like a lot of people that I grew up around used religion as an excuse not to think. They would say things like gay marriage should be illegal because all of our laws come from the Bible. No, all of our laws do not come from the Bible. I'm sorry, but like real estate law, do you think the real estate regulations of the state of Illinois come from the Bible? No, they don't. Do you think, and it's like they would sit there, well, all of our laws, and I'd say, no, they don't. And they would say, well, why am I not murdering you now? And I'd say there's this thing called a social contract. You don't murder me in exchange for me not murdering you. And this is the social contract. Yeah, but that comes from the Bible. I'm like, no, it doesn't come from the Bible. There are countries where they don't believe in the Bible, and they also have laws against murder. No, it would be infuriating. It would be infuriating. So yeah, there were probably times where I sounded like Christopher Hitchens because I understand that your patience can kind of run out when you're dealing with people. When every conversation you're trying to convince people maybe the USA invading Iraq is not a good thing, and they start talking about Moses, it gets frustrating, right? Yes, I have. I have seen that episode. And we'll talk about that. But there you go. It gets a little bit frustrating. And so, yeah, there were times I was kind of an atheist, new atheist asshole when I was in high school, and I regret that. The other thing is I kind of admire people now who have, very dedicated beliefs. I used to be kind of a skeptic. I used to kind of, but I kind of realized that people who have solid beliefs that are not based on reason, that they're just very passionate about. They just really want to go out and struggle with what they believe is right. That's something I really admire now. And the parts of me that are like that are the parts I like the best, the passion. So on some degree or other, if you had met me when I was 15, 16, you probably would have thought I was a new atheist asshole because I was just so tired of people using religion as an excuse not to think, because religion people think about religion. I mean, what do you think theology is? What do you think all the arguments and the Reformation were about? Religion is not an excuse not to think. You can be smart and be religious. Unfortunately, there are many people who don't choose to do so, but that doesn't mean they don't represent all religion. So there you go. All right. All right. What is the loose face principle in China? I don't know. I'm going to Google it. Loose face principle in China. Bum-ba-dum. What is the loose face principle China? The cult of face in China refers to a cultural understanding of respect, honor, and social standing, being the butt of a joke, not knowing the answer to a question, or being blamed for something publicly. Face as a sociological concept. Okay. This is an aspect of Chinese culture I need to learn about. I don't pretend to be an expert on Chinese culture. I certainly am not. All right. Next question. Thoughts on Pol Potism and Chairman Gonzalo. I've answered both of those many, many times, at great length. I consider the Shining Path to be a dangerous ultra-leftist sect that paved the way for Fujimori to take power in Brazil and implement austerity, that murdered the other communists of Peru, that was hostile to Cuba, that was hostile to China. I have a very negative view of Gonzalo and the Shining Path. Very negative assessment of them. Pol Pot, I also have a very negative view. Pol Pot was funded by the United States. He attacked Vietnam. There's a great book on Pol Pot called The Revolution Rescued by Erwin Silber, which I have somewhere. This is a great book by an American Maoist communist giving like a very good critique. Kampuchea, The Revolution Rescued. I recommend you read this book. It's for free on the Marxist Internet Archive. I recommend you read this book. Pol Pot was an ultra-leftist, and that he believed you could achieve full communism in Cambodia without industrialization. His whole theory was agrarian communism. They could have full communism in Cambodia without industrializing the country on the basis of an agrarian economy. And that was just wrong. It's just wrong. You can't. Communism is all about raising productivity, increasing the level of wealth in society. And there's a reason the U.S. imperialists were supporting him. And you should read this book. Pol Pot, I have a very negative view of. And it infuriates me that the ruling classes of this world, they always bring him up as an excuse of why communism is bad. They were funding him. They armed him. The CIA and the Western capitalists supported him. So there you go. All righty. All right. Thoughts on the Durham report and the deep state interfering in our politics? Oh. What do you think of Jordan Peterson's appraisal of Marxism? Question mark. Writing it down. All right. Well, it's pretty clear that there was interference in the 2016 elections and in the 2020 elections. It wasn't done by Russia. It was done by the American government. The FBI, the CIA, agencies that are supposed to be nonpartisan, clearly meddled. And the Durham report shows there was no, Trump colluding with Russia, but they acted like it was real for political reasons, and that the investigation into Donald Trump was completely improper. That's what the Durham report shows. But we also combine that with the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. That was a real scandal about the presidential candidate's son, about Hunter Biden, and it got suppressed. Facebook wouldn't even allow you to share the link. Twitter did the same for political reasons. And we had, intelligence officials going around and saying, oh, it's a Russian conspiracy because they wanted to suppress it. At this point, we have a group of people in the American intelligence apparatus that are connected with big corporations and the big ultra monopolies in Silicon Valley that think they know what's best for the American people. And they have no problem meddling in our elections and trying to make sure certain people get elected and certain people don't. And that is a scandal. And this is Bonapartism. This is capitalism. This is capitalism in decay. And this is sections of the ruling class struggling for power with each other and trying to secure their grip on power and trying to stabilize the economy by utilizing the state and utilizing the working class as their foot soldiers and struggles between them. That's what this is. That's what it is. It is divisions in the ruling class. And it's playing out. It's playing out. And part of that, and that, again, I wrote a whole book about this is the process of capitalism in decay and the capitalist system breaking down, right? And this is what happens when you have a long-term crisis of overproduction. The capitalist way of resolving it is with degrowth and war, and they fight among themselves. They recruit workers to be their foot soldiers. This is the revolutionary process. So there we go. Have you ever seen the Seinfeld episode where Elaine dates a communist? Oh, I have. And I realize now, the thing about that, Seinfeld, here's what you need to understand about that episode. So that episode came out in the 90s. Communist groups were very unheard of in the 90s. They were, people knew there were communist groups in the 70s. In the 80s, they started to be obscure. And in the 90s, communists were very obscure in America. People didn't know they existed. And the Seinfeld episode is very much Seinfeld. A lot of Seinfeld is about New York City. You have the diner, you have certain accents, you have certain characters that are considered to be very New York. Seinfeld, a lot of the Seinfeld show is references to the specific culture of New York City. You have the New York accent, and you have the soup Nazi, and you have the library book inspector, and it's all about like kind of the unique quirkiness of New York City politics, and in particular of New York City, like yuppies, kind of like wealthier people who live in apartments in Manhattan, professionals, kind of upper middle class people who are very competitive and social and kind of shallow and judge each other, and such. That's what the Seinfeld show is about. Even during the darkest period of McCarthyism, the FBI, in one of their reports, they said the Communist Party USA is down to less than 10,000 members. 2/3 of them live in New York City. Communists, if there's one part of the United States you're going to find communists, it's New York City. New York City, historically, it has just been communists are always here. This is a very cosmopolitan international city. Trotsky lived here for a while. Bukharin lived here for a while. Ho Chi Minh lived here for a while. New York City is like a center of communism in America. The Communist Party USA, their headquarters was here during the Earl Browder years, the late 30s when they were the biggest. This has always been a center of communist politics. So what that was about was very much like a Seinfeld. That was a part of New York City politics, right? It was, or New York City culture. New York City, you would see communists. Even in the 90s when communism was pretty obscure. Now it's a little more common because of everything, but in the 90s when communism was very obscure in New York City, you'd see the Workers' World or the ISO or the RCP selling their newspaper because it was New York City, right? You would see communist demonstrations. Even in the 90s, Gus Hall and Communist Party USA, they were a force to be reckoned with in New York City, at least locally in the Democratic Party. The reformed Democratic clubs of Chelsea and Manhattan, they had a lot of influence, right? And that the Communist Party and New York City, because it is so cosmopolitan, because there's people from so many different parts of the world, because of the huge influence of the CPUSA in the 1930s, and for many different reasons, because the UN is here. If there's one city in the United States where you're going to find communists, it's going to be New York City. And that's what that episode is talking about, that it's a quirky thing about New York City. In most of America, you'd never hear of a communist, never see a communist unless you're like at a peace rally or something in the 90s. Unless you're at a peace rally or something, communists were just unheard of. But in New York City, you might randomly see somebody passing out a leaflet. You might go on a blind date and the guy turns out to be a Trotskyite or a Maoist. Or, New York City was unique like that. That's what that episode is really about. And there's some jokes about communists wearing drab clothes. That is true. Communists as a group tend to not pay attention to fashion. There is a certain, and honestly, I don't think it's good. I have been to many, many communist meetings where there's no music. No music, no poetry, nothing. It is a group of people. None of them are wearing suits, though. They're all just wearing like kind of plain clothes. And they all get up and read a speech like this. And they have an angry look on their face while they are reading their speech like this. And that's awful. I mean, nobody wants to be part of that. And nobody smiles. Everyone's mad. And they walk in like this, and they are so mad. And then they read their speech about historical and dialectical materialism. And U.S. imperialism is evil. The working class will rise. And it's just, it's shrill, you know, and there's a lot of communists. There's a lot of communists that is kind of the stereotype, right? Is very angry, young, like college-aged person who wears very drab clothes and has an angry look on their face and is kind of autistic, I guess, right? And there's no music at the meeting, and there's no poetry, and there's no like good oratory where you relate to your audience. They're reading a very important statement with an angry look on their face, and that's, you don't want that, right? I went to a protest years ago. There was a like a Maoist communist club at City University of New York. A couple of their members got arrested, were facing criminal charges. So me and you know, my camera woman who I was working with, Press TV, we went to go cover the rally to do a story on it. Oh my God, my camera woman was an anarchist, and she had a very negative view of communists. I was trying to win her to be a communist, and I tell you, taking her to this rally, I was like so embarrassed for communists, because it was every little one of these Trotskyite, Maoist, ultra-left clubs at CUNY. And they were all up there, and one after another were reading statements about, we reject the City University of New York's persecution of revolutionary working class intellectuals. We are so important. One point, they introduced one speaker. They're like, you know, this guy will speak as he is the chairman of the Revolutionary Student Club of CUNY. And he got up. Before I make my remarks, I must clarify, I am not actually the chairman of the club. I am the general secretary. Oh. You know, one group got up and read a statement supporting the students who'd been arrested, but denouncing Mao Zedong and Maoism. Instead, we must follow Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution. It was just so cringe. It was just so cringe. And that's kind of the stereotype of communists, right? And I used to be like that. And I now work very hard not to be like that, right? I work very, very hard to make, you know, when I put on an event, there has to be music there. It's a rule now. I will not do an event. It is better to not have an event than to have an event with no music. Number one, I try to have people smiling. I did a whole thing about how to have a communist meeting. We can do that again. You know, there's an art to having a communist meeting. There are 3 types of communist meetings. You can have a study meeting, you can have a public meeting, and you can have a street meeting. And there's an art to doing all 3 of them, right? It's almost like kind of like a church service in a way, or, you know, I mean, it's like, you know, I mean, you have a public event, you should have music there, you should have a main speaker, you should have activist reports because you have to show people what it's about. There's a certain art to doing a public meeting. There's a certain art to doing a street meeting. Street meetings are very different, right? It's about creating a spectacle. It should have very short speeches, you know, and a study meeting shouldn't be recorded. It should be a smaller group. People should discuss and ask questions. There's a science to all of this, right? There's a way to do these things. Do you have an analysis of Titus Andronicus? No, I don't. I haven't studied that particular work. All right. What do you think of Jordan Peterson's appraisal of Marxism? One of my more popular videos. I debunked Jordan Peterson and his video, The Truth About Communism, for 2 hours. I ripped it to shreds. And so Jordan Peterson can be interesting when he's not talking about politics or communism specifically. When he starts talking about communism, he sounds like a complete fool. He sounds like a complete fool. He has no idea what he's talking about. And it is utterly infuriating to watch because he's just completely clueless. And he says things that are beyond wrong. They're just so far off. I mean, he claimed in one of his videos, you know, that the Tsarist Russia was a paradise compared to what the Bolsheviks created. It's like there was no running water in most of the country in Tsarist Russia. There was mass illiteracy. Like the life expectancy almost doubled. How can he say that? But here's the link to my my video debunking. I just ripped to shreds Jordan Peterson's video about communism. He is just totally wrong. And he says things that anyone who knew anything, he panders to people's anti-communist bias. He tries to convince people that the woke left are communists, which they absolutely are not. He says postmodern neo-Marxists. Postmodernism and Marxism are polar opposites. Go and watch my video. If you want to see Peterson be debunked when he talks about communism, go and watch this video. I do 2 hours of just taking Peterson apart on these points. And it's one of my more popular pieces because other people don't do this, right? People don't do this kind of stuff. I do. That's why I exist, to debunk Jordan Peterson. I also debunked a Noam Chomsky video about communism. So there you go. Caleb's on Ukrainian hit list. I am on the Ukrainian hit list, and I get frustrated because, people seem to have it in their head. Like, I really don't get it. Thoughts on Eritrea. Okay. People don't seem to get that I have been subjected to one of the most vicious smear campaigns that anyone on the so-called Marxist left has been subjected to in our time. Okay. They have gone after every aspect of me. I have spent years as an anti-racist activist, but people say that I'm a white supremacist. People claim it is, people say I was never a leftist. I've always been on the far right. I have more leftist street cred than anybody, right? I was arrested at Occupy Wall Street. I risked my life trying to bring aid to Yemen. I videotaped an act of police brutality. You can go down my resume. It's like a mile long, like the communists of Brazil, the leaders of the Trade Union Center, the main coalition of trade unions in Brazil, paid me to go to Brazil to give a 2-hour presentation on capitalism and the oil price manipulation. So it's like I have been subjected to a huge amount of character assassination and demonization. And if you go into any of the communist circles in America, the first thing you're told is there's this guy Caleb and he's bad. And people don't even know why I'm bad. I'm a Nazi, pedophile, rapist. I'm every evil thing. I eat babies. I'm just the most evil thing you've ever met. And it's bullshit. And the sad thing is, most of these people, if they'll repeat this stuff. Well, you're bad because blah, blah, blah. And I'll start to debunk everything they say because it won't be based on anything true. And they'll just insist on believing it. Well, everyone says you're bad. Yeah, because people have been lied to. Because I work for Russian TV. I'm considered to be a foreign asset because I work at Russian TV. Because I support the people of Donbass who are being bombed and have been facing 15 years of bombardment. Because I support the Iranians and their struggle against U.S. imperialism. Because I risked my life to help the Yemenis. Yes, I have been subject to a huge amount of character assassination. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not a pedophile. And I'm not a rapist, And there is a huge coordinated campaign against me. And if people can't, the fact that I'm actually on the fucking Ukrainian kill list, like the Ukrainian government, which is backed by the United States, has me on a list of people to kill. And people still can't get it through their heads. Oh, Caleb, why are you always complaining? Why are you paranoid? Maybe people just don't like you. What has been done to me? The lengths they have gone to push people that I used to be friends with to say negative things about me. They've contacted people I haven't even spoken to years ago when I was in college and begged them to make statements denouncing me. They have gone after my family. You have no idea the amount of persecution I've been subjected to. And the fact that all these people just can't get it through their minds that I am, I'm not perfect. If I made mistakes, sure. Do I disagree? Maybe I disagree with you on this point, but can we just acknowledge that I'm a target? Oh no, Caleb, you're just a nerd. I saw a thought slime video. No. There are people with huge platforms with hundreds of thousands of subscribers who have all the things to make videos about. Have made videos lying about me, claiming I'm a white supremacist, I'm a neo-Nazi. It's insane, the amount of direct targeting that has been aimed at me is beyond insane. And if people can't acknowledge that, it drives me up the wall, because there's so many people who just insist, oh, nothing's being done to you, Caleb. It's bull. No, I have very clearly been targeted, and they have lied about me. They have stretched the truth. They've manipulated things, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm not going to stop. But if you're watching this, I will just say I'm at the point where, like, I honestly, in some cases, I appreciate it, because people who if you can't take the heat of the heat, get out of the sun. There are so many people who, like, don't understand that they are going to throw every piece of feces at me that they possibly can, just to see if any of it will stick. And, I'm on the goddamn list. I met Dari Dugina more than I met her father. I met her father once. I met her a few more times than I met her father. There were many times I was in Russia. We would go out to dinner and stuff. Very nice person. And I was horrified when they killed her. And I mean, it was awful. And the left just celebrated it because she's bad, because they'd never heard of her. They'd never read anything by her. This was a beautiful young woman, was very kind, loved her country, Russia, was very scholarly, was very good. Had lived in France for a while, spoke English and Russian and French very well. I mean, was a brilliant, beautiful young woman who was working very, very hard to stand up for Russia and for her homeland. And the way they celebrated her murder, I mean, it's awful. It's really, really awful. And the way people can't seem to comprehend that, like, the people who have targeted me have all, somehow it gets back to me talking to Dugin. And I mean, if you can't figure out that this is coming from a pro-imperialist place, I don't know what to say to you. Does that mean I've never made a mistake? No. Does that mean I've never done anything wrong? No. Does that mean I won't do something wrong or make a mistake in the future or disappoint you in some way? No. But you have to recognize that I've been targeted, and I have been viciously targeted. No, you can't report it to law enforcement. No, you can't, because it's in Ukraine and it's being done with the sanction, with basically the support of NATO. But yes, I have been viciously targeted. Now, I haven't been assassinated. I haven't been shot. But I have, they have gone all out to destroy my reputation. They've harmed my wife. They've harmed my family. They have been very vicious to me. And, I guess I could get repetitive if I keep going on about this, but what pisses me off is that people somehow think by targeting me, they're doing something heroic. That never surprises me. You get these people, like one of these, what is it? Chapo Trap House assholes was yelling at me today. And I said to them, you're ridiculous going after me. You're basically just targeting dissidents. You're the kind of person who would have committed hate crimes against LGBT people 20 years ago before it was cool to be LGBT. You're the kind of person that would have attended lynchings. It's like these people, it's like I'm being attacked by the American government. I'm on the Ukrainian government's kill list. There are videos made by huge YouTube channels telling big, dirty, nasty lies about me. And somehow, you're going to prove that you're just such a heroic person for standing up to Caleb. Like, really? Really? Yeah. It takes balls to stand up to me. I'm only being attacked by the most powerful government in the world and their proxy in Ukraine. I've only had my name dragged through the mud by every major YouTube person on the left. Give me a break. Give me a break, and it's these people, it's like, and it's like, they attack me and they think that they're like, it's like this great, brave, bold act. No, it's not. It just proves you're a coward. If you attack me at this point, you're doing something beyond cowardly. You're basically admitting you support the Ukrainian Nazis. There's somebody who's on their list. There's somebody who's already been targeted so viciously by the pro-imperialist campaign. And you want some of that action. It infuriates me beyond measure. And that, it really just infuriates me. And so you asked me about that. I'm just giving you my answer. You asked me why I'm on the Ukrainian kill list. Exactly. And then people, there's just some people who just can't get it through their minds that I'm being treated unfairly. that, they just can't get it through their minds. And a lot of it's just jealousy. And that's so sad. Why are you jealous of me? Like, what have I ever done to you? I am constantly giving other people platforms. I am constantly encouraging other people to do stuff, trying to push other people forward. And you're jealous of me. Like, if you want what I have, do what I do, and I'll help you do it. Right? I'm not in this to hog the spotlight. I mean, I'm not pushing I am trying to constantly empower other people to do what I do. So the idea that you'd be jealous of me and that makes it okay for you to lie about me and smear me, it's really sad. It's really, really sad. And I will say this, and then we'll move on because we don't want to dwell on this too much. Right? There are certain people who have rendered themselves irrelevant. Right? They used to work with me, and then they had a little baby tantrum. And now their only relevance these people have and will ever have is that they talk shit about me. And that's it. That's it. That is all they've got. They've got nothing else. All they have is, I used to one time work with this person named Caleb, and Caleb blah, 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 blah. And half the time what they're saying, maybe 90% of the time what they're saying isn't even true, or it's an exaggeration or whatever. What a pathetic person. Is that who you want to be? You want to be the guy who used to work with the guy who's so hated by the American establishment, is on the Ukrainian kill list, and you can talk some shit about him. Good for you. Good for you. And that is all they'll ever be. I was the best hope these people ever had to be something relevant. And I helped people get on the Tucker Carlson show. I arranged for someone to get on the Tucker Carlson show when I couldn't go on. I encouraged someone else to give a very important talk, and they would never have given this talk if it wasn't for me. I have done so much to open doors and help people. And then people fall on their faces because they're losers. And I can't help you. And I do my best to help you, and you fall on your face. And instead of attacking the people who want to destroy you, me, and everyone else who's anti-imperialist, they attack me. What a sad piece of humanity these people are. Seriously, right? That's going to be your big achievement. I'm sorry, Vosh, Thought Slime, ContraPoints, Danny Haifong, they all beat you to it, right? There's much bigger dogs trying to destroy me. And if the only thing you can ever accomplish in your life is that you helped smear me, you're a fucking loser, right? And that's all you're ever going to be. And I was your ticket to actually make a contribution, and you spit in my fucking face, And revolution's not a dinner party. Sometimes people have to drive cars. Do you know that? Sometimes people have to drive cars. Sometimes people have to keep their promises they made to other people. People can't always get what they want. People don't always agree with everything. Next question. All right. Thoughts on Eritrea. All right. So you'll remember Eritrea used to be part of Ethiopia. For many years, Ethiopia was ruled by Haile Selassie. Haile Selassie was the emperor, was the emperor of Ethiopia. It was an independent African country. Mussolini invaded Ethiopia, colonized Ethiopia. 1935, the Soviet Union defended Ethiopia, but the Italian fascists were basically given a free pass to destroy Ethiopia. After the Second World War, Haile Selassie was returned to power in Ethiopia. And the people of Eritrea started fighting for their independence from the Ethiopian Empire. And they started fighting for their independence. They were led by communists. Then in 1978, there was a military coup, and a pro-Soviet government called the Derg, led by Mengistu, came to power, and they were trying to create socialism in Ethiopia. They had support from Cuba. So then the Eritrean resistance divided. There was one faction that wanted to just have autonomy within Ethiopia, and they laid down their arms. There was another faction that continued fighting and got weapons and guns and support from the United States and China to fight against Ethiopia. The civil war continued. Ultimately, Eritrea won its independence. However, the Derg lost power. During the 1990s, the Derg, the pro-Soviet government, was overthrown. Now, and Ethiopia has had a pretty pro-Western government since then. But Eritrea, the Maoist communists that were fighting the Ethiopian government, they're in power. But now Eritrea has pivoted to aligning with Russia and China. Many people refer to Eritrea's government as the North Korea of Africa. I don't know if the government still espouses Marxism, Leninism, but it comes out of a hardline Marxist, Leninist, China-aligned history. The ruling party of Ethiopia comes out of that communist tradition. It's a deeply impoverished country, but it is friendly to Russia and China. It's hostile to the United States. But I understand in Ethiopia right now, there's a big division going on in the country as well. But yes, Eritrea is an anti-imperialist government. It's a very poor country. It's very weak. It's very isolated. The USA is constantly trying to overthrow them and destabilize them. So it's a complicated situation because now Ethiopia is also having a lot of internal turmoil. Ethiopia was pretty solidly in the US camp for a while, but then it pivoted. Ethiopia, there's a lot of division and confusion. And China's role in Africa, China doesn't play favorites. China wants to do business with everyone. And so, China's role in Africa is leading, many African countries are planning, to put forward a peace proposal for Ukraine very soon. China's role in Africa is very, very important. But yes, the Eritrean government has a Marxist history, but it was the faction that fought against the Derg. It was the China-aligned communists. That's the history of Eritrea. The current government traces its roots back to the Marxist, Leninist, but China-aligned communists who fought Haile Selassie, and then fought the Derg. So I hope that answers your question. All right, folks, it's been fun. It's almost 3 hours we've been going tonight, but it's worth it. It's always worth it to engage with all of you. And, that was fun, where tonight I just kind of talked about all kinds of stuff. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate all of you. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. I'm going to put on the closing music, and away we go. Upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.